My name is Courtney Young. I am 34 years old. Yesterday morning, I stood in the vaulted living room of a luxury eco-cabin in the Cascade Mountains, while my older sister shoved a dirty wet mop against my chest. She told me to sterilize the kitchen and hide my 9-year-old son in the unheated basement because her husband's high-net-worth investors were arriving in 10 minutes. She looked me right in the eye and said I needed to earn my keep, since I was enjoying a free vacation on her dime. What she did not know, and what my parents sitting blissfully by the fire did not know, was that her credit card had declined a week ago. I was the one who paid the $6,200 booking fee, and as Tyler screamed at me to hurry up, I pulled out my phone, opened my booking app, and prepared to press cancel. Before I tell you exactly what happened when the property manager arrived, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the Grape Echo Stories channel, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. I would also love to know how old you are and where you are watching from right now. Now let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday in Portland where this nightmare actually started. The rain was slashing against my office window in downtown Portland when my phone vibrated against my desk. I work as a data analyst. My days consist of finding patterns and fixing anomalies. In my family, my role is exactly the same. I am the invisible safety net. My older sister Amber calls herself a lifestyle influencer. She curates a life of organic lattes and designer hauls. My screen lit up with a message in our family group chat. Amber announced she had partnered with a boutique hospitality brand to gift our parents, John and Carol, a premium weekend retreat in Bend. My mother responded with crying emojis. My father called her their golden girl. 2 seconds later, a private message from Amber flashed on my screen. The tone shifted entirely. The property manager wants a card on file and mine just declined. They will not hold the dates. Courtney, I need a huge favor. Can you cover the $6,200? I swear I will pay you back when my next brand deal hits. Do not tell Mom and Dad. Let me have this win. I stared at the staggering number on my screen. My chest tightened. $6,200 was a heavy chunk of the savings I had slowly built for my son Leo. But I pictured my father rubbing his arthritic knees in the damp coastal cold. I pictured my mother, who had not taken a real vacation in 20 years. I swallowed the sour taste in my mouth, logged into my banking app, and transferred the funds. I replied with one word: done. I thought she might text back a simple thank you. Instead, my phone buzzed again with a new message in the main family chat. Amber had written a long paragraph. Just finalized all the payments. Mom and Dad, pack your bags. This trip is 100% on me. You deserve the best. I sat in my quiet cubicle listening to the rain. She did not just take the credit. She erased my existence to elevate her own status. My fingers gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. I told myself to let it go, that the trip was for our parents. But as I watched my father praise Amber again, a cold knot of resentment took root in my stomach. I had no idea that a week later Amber would use my own money to turn me into her personal maid. The drive from Portland took 4 hours, winding through the dense, snow-heavy evergreen forests of the Cascade Mountains. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel of my all-wheel drive Subaru, navigating the slick patches of black ice. In the passenger seat, my 9-year-old son Leo hummed a quiet tune, his face pressed against the cold glass, marveling at the towering frosted pines. I felt a tight knot of anxiety sitting heavy in my chest. I had drained a significant portion of my savings to secure this weekend. I did it to give my aging parents a slice of luxury they could never afford on a fixed income. I wanted to see my father rest his arthritic knees by a warm fire. I wanted my mother to wake up to the sight of untouched alpine snow. I did not do it to boost my sister's ego, yet I was walking into a situation where my financial sacrifice was being repackaged as her personal triumph. I pulled into the heated driveway of the Bend property. The structure was an imposing architectural marvel of dark timber and sheer glass jutting out over a steep ravine. It looked expensive, exclusive, and intimidating. Parked right near the front entrance, taking up the best spot, was a pristine white Tesla. Before I could even turn off my engine, the heavy oak front door swung open. Tyler stepped out onto the porch. My brother-in-law wore a shiny designer puffer jacket that looked thoroughly untested by actual weather. He held a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and his glowing smartphone in the other. He did not wave. He did not walk down the steps to help me carry our heavy duffel bags. Instead, he stared at the front grille of his electric vehicle and let out an irritated sigh. "This freezing temperature is draining my battery," Tyler complained, not bothering to say hello as I hauled a duffel bag over my shoulder. He tapped his phone screen with a frantic energy. "The range is dropping by the hour. I leased this dual-motor model specifically for trips like this, but the Oregon cold is chewing through the charge. I cannot afford to be stranded here when my investors arrive tomorrow." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. My breath plumed in the frigid air as I handed Leo his small backpack. Tyler sidestepped to let us pass, his eyes remaining glued to his crypto trading charts. He treated my arrival as a minor distraction from his very important life. We stepped inside, and the cold mountain air was instantly replaced by the scent of expensive cedar and wood smoke. The living room was breathtaking. A towering stone fireplace anchored the space, casting a rich golden glow over genuine leather sofas and a rustic dining table long enough to seat 12 people. Sitting by the hearth, bathed in the warmth, were my parents. My father held a mug of dark roast coffee, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in months. My mother smiled brightly, reaching out her arms to hug Leo. Seeing them so peaceful provided a fleeting moment of comfort. It almost justified the gaping hole in my bank account. Then Amber appeared. My sister descended the floating glass staircase wearing matching cashmere loungewear. Her hair was styled in effortless waves, framing a face glowing from expensive skincare routines. She did not offer a hug. She pointed a manicured finger toward a narrow, unassuming door tucked away near the laundry room. "Your bags go down there, Court," Amber directed, her tone brisk and authoritative. "Mom and Dad have the guest wing on this floor. Tyler and I took the master suite upstairs. We need the extra square footage because Tyler has important virtual meetings before his associates drive up tomorrow." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I guided Leo toward the narrow door and pushed it open. We descended the wooden stairs, and the temperature dropped with every single step. The basement was unfinished. The walls were bare concrete, and the floor was uncarpeted, radiating a damp, biting chill that seeped straight through the soles of my boots. Two thin twin beds were shoved against the far wall, covered in scratchy, faded quilts that looked like an afterthought. There was no space heater. There was no window. I could see my own breath misting in the dim overhead light. The spatial hierarchy of the family had been laid out in physical form. The paying sponsor was banished to the dungeon, while the influencer enjoyed the penthouse. Leo dropped his backpack onto the nearest twin bed. His small hands reached out and picked up a piece of thick, glossy paper resting on the pillow. "Mom?" he asked, his voice echoing in the barren space. "What is this?" I dropped my heavy duffel and took the paper from him. It was a schedule, printed with meticulous care and sealed in heavy lamination. At the top, in a bubbly cursive font, it read, "Cabin Weekend Duties." I scanned the first column. Under the names of Amber's teenage sons, the assigned activities were listed clearly. Hot tub relaxation hour, virtual reality game tournament, ski lodge lunch outing. I shifted my gaze to the next column. Under my name, the list was dense and detailed. Prepare morning breakfast buffet. Clear and wash all dishes. Wipe down granite counters. Prepare artisan farm-to-table dinner. Load dishwasher. Sanitize kitchen island. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the final column. Under Leo's name, there was only one task, but the words burned into my retinas. Heavy trash removal and woodshed duty. I stood paralyzed on the freezing concrete floor, the glossy paper turning rigid in my cold hands. I had drained my carefully guarded savings to secure this luxury retreat. I had quietly funded the beautiful stone fireplace, the cedar walls, and the sweeping views so my aging parents could rest. Instead, my sister had orchestrated a scenario where I was reduced to unpaid domestic staff, and my young son was drafted as the groundskeeper. Footsteps padded softly down the wooden stairs. Amber stood on the bottom landing, wrapping her cashmere cardigan tighter around her chest to ward off the basement chill. "It is a little brisk down here," she whispered, forcing a tight conspiratorial smile. "I just wanted to come down and say thank you again for stepping up. And to remind you, we need to keep the payment our little secret. Mom and Dad would feel so guilty if they knew you paid for this instead of a hospitality brand. We do not want to ruin their vacation, do we?" Her eyes held a sharp warning, expertly masked as familial concern. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was using my protective love for our parents as a gag. She calculated that I would never cause a scene and shatter their joy. She assumed I would swallow the disrespect, tie on an apron, and scrub the grease from the pans while she filmed herself sipping wine by the fire. The sheer audacity of the laminated schedule burned through the lingering chill in my bones. I looked at Amber standing on the stairs. I looked at the chore chart in my hand. I looked at Leo, who was rubbing his arms to stay warm in his winter coat. I did not say a single word to my sister. I walked straight past her, my boots hitting the wooden stairs with heavy, deliberate thuds. My fingers gripped the laminated schedule so tightly the plastic cracked, ready to walk into the living room and confront the delusion head-on. The climb up the wooden staircase felt like ascending into a completely different dimension. The freezing dampness of the concrete basement faded, replaced by a wall of comforting, fragrant heat. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into the sprawling main floor. The vaulted living room was bathed in a rich, golden light emanating from a crackling stone fireplace. My father slouched comfortably in a plush leather armchair, resting his feet on a woven ottoman. He held a crystal glass, filled with a dark ruby liquid. It was a local Pinot Noir. I knew the exact vintage and the tasting notes because I had swiped my own debit card at a boutique Willamette Valley vineyard just 2 days prior to purchase that specific bottle. "To our golden girl," my father announced. His voice resonated with genuine pride and relaxation. He tipped his glass toward Amber, who was standing near the polished kitchen island. "We cannot thank you enough for this incredible gift. You always know how to take care of your family." My mother chimed in, her cheeks flushed with warmth and unburdened joy. "We are so lucky to have such a successful, generous daughter." My chest constricted, making it difficult to draw a full breath. The laminated paper in my grip crinkled sharply. They were drinking my expensive wine, sitting in the luxury mountain property I had rented, while praising the sister who had just banished me to an unheated cellar. I marched straight toward the kitchen island. My intention was to slam the rigid chore chart onto the quartz countertop and demand an explanation. I wanted to force Amber to answer for the sheer audacity of her demands. But before I could even open my mouth, Amber held up a perfectly manicured hand, palm facing outward. She did not even bother to look at my face. Her attention was entirely consumed by a tall aluminum tripod. She was busy clamping her smartphone into the center of a blindingly bright LED ring light. "Not right now," she hissed under her breath, her eyes darting to check her reflection in the dark screen. "The lighting is peaking. I need to capture the golden hour aesthetic before the sun dips behind the pine trees." I stepped directly into her line of sight, blocking the glow of the window. I held up the plastic schedule. "Amber, what is the meaning of this? Why is my 9-year-old son assigned to haul heavy trash and firewood in freezing weather?" Amber let out a long, theatrical sigh. She reached out and pushed my shoulder, shoving me out of the camera frame. "Courtney, do not ruin my shot. Mom and Dad are having a perfect evening. If you want to pitch a fit over a few simple household tasks, you can go outside. Now move out of the way. My followers want a house tour." She tapped a button on her screen, and her entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The harsh, whispering sister vanished into thin air. In her place stood a radiant, warm lifestyle influencer. "Hey everyone," Amber cooed to the camera. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness and bubbly enthusiasm. "I am so thrilled to welcome you to the gorgeous mountain retreat I booked for my parents this weekend. Giving back to the people who raised me is my favorite thing in the entire world." I stared at her profile. The magnitude of her deception was staggering. She was broadcasting a fabricated reality to thousands of strangers on the internet, building her brand on a foundation of my stolen resources. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. Tyler strolled into the room, utterly oblivious to the silent war waging near the kitchen sink. He clapped his hands together, the sound bouncing off the high timber ceilings. My brother-in-law wore a fitted cashmere sweater that likely cost a small fortune. Tyler operates in the murky, unregulated waters of cryptocurrency. He sells digital air, chasing trends and pitching speculative tokens to anyone who will listen. For years, he has treated my steady, reliable career in corporate data analytics as a pathetic joke. "All right, folks," Tyler announced loudly, grabbing the open bottle of Pinot Noir and pouring himself a generous measure. "Tomorrow is a pivotal day. I have some wealthy associates driving up from Silicon Valley. We are hosting a catered ski lunch right here in the main dining room." My father looked suitably impressed. "Important clients, Tyler." "The most important," Tyler replied, swirling the red wine in his glass with a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist. "These guys manage serious venture capital funds. They are looking to inject heavy cash into my new startup. I told them I owned a premium asset up here in the Cascades. When they see this place, the custom architecture, the panoramic views, they will realize they are dealing with a heavy hitter. The deal will close itself." He turned his gaze toward me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Courtney, we will need the kitchen spotless by 10 in the morning. My associates are accustomed to a high level of service. Try to keep the cooking smells contained, okay? You know how it is." Actually, you probably do not know how it is, crunching numbers in a tiny cubicle all day. Just make sure the hors d'oeuvres are plated beautifully before they arrive. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a sickening clarity. The realization hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the granite counter to keep my balance. This trip was never about giving our parents a relaxing vacation. Amber had not begged me for the money just to save face. She and Tyler had orchestrated a calculated financial fraud. They needed a pristine, high-end backdrop to trick wealthy investors into funding Tyler's failing business ventures. Amber's credit cards were bouncing. Tyler's empire was an illusion built on leased electric cars and empty promises. They had hijacked my life savings to bankroll a fake corporate retreat, and to maximize their profit margin, they had designated me as their unpaid catering staff. The humiliation threatened to boil over into a screaming match. I wanted to tear the laminated schedule into shreds. I wanted to pull up my banking app and show my father the brutal $6,200 deduction. I wanted to watch Tyler's smug, superior expression shatter into a million jagged pieces on the floor. But I looked over at my parents. They were laughing together by the hearth, holding hands, looking younger than they had in a decade. If I detonated the bomb right now, I would destroy their peaceful evening. Amber would spin a lie. Tyler would deflect the blame. They would twist the narrative and paint me as a jealous, unstable spinster trying to ruin a beautiful family moment. I closed my eyes. I took a deep, steadying breath. The hot, frantic anger in my chest cooled into something much more dangerous. It hardened into a sharp, tactical strategy. I did not argue. I did not throw the schedule at his face. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked into the sprawling gourmet kitchen. I pulled a heavy wooden cutting board onto the counter. I opened the oversized refrigerator and began pulling out the organic vegetables, artisan cheeses, and premium meats I had purchased with my own paycheck. The tactile sensation of the cold steel chef knife grounding my hands helped clear my racing mind. I sliced through a tough winter squash, the blade hitting the wood with a rhythmic, satisfying thud. They thought they had outsmarted me. They believed my lifelong habit of keeping the peace meant I would silently absorb their disrespect forever. They assumed I was a passive workhorse, too timid to bite back. I minced a clove of garlic, the pungent scent filling the kitchen. As I scraped the diced pieces into a hot cast-iron skillet, the oil sizzled loudly. I watched the raw ingredients transform under the intense heat. I would cook their extravagant dinner tonight. I would let them drink my expensive wine. I would allow them to sleep comfortably in their stolen luxury suites. I would wait. A skilled data analyst knows that you never reveal your findings until you have gathered all the irrefutable evidence. You let the target build their own trap. You wait for the exact moment when the stakes are at their highest. Tyler needed everything to be flawless for his wealthy venture capitalists tomorrow morning. Amber needed her digital facade to remain untarnished for her followers. They had positioned their entire fragile universe on the foundation of my bank account. I seasoned the roasting pan, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. I was going to let Tyler invite his VIP guests right up to the front door. I was going to let Amber record every single second of the glamorous charade. And then I was going to pull the rug out from under them. But before the sun rose on the day of my reckoning, the freezing mountain weather would bring a new crisis, one that endangered my little boy and pushed my patience far past the point of no return. The Oregon winter morning crept into the unheated basement like a physical weight. I opened my eyes to a room shrouded in shadows and biting frost. My breath materialized as a white plume in the dim light. I pulled the thin quilt tighter around my shoulders, shivering uncontrollably. The concrete floor seemed to radiate ice directly into my bones. I reached across the narrow gap between the twin beds, expecting to brush the familiar warmth of my son. My hand found only a rumpled, freezing sheet. Leo was gone. As a single mother, your brain is hardwired to leap to the worst conclusion in a fraction of a second. I threw off the blanket, ignoring the sharp sting of the frigid air against my skin. I stood up, my bare feet recoiling from the icy cement. I checked the small adjoining bathroom. Empty. I pulled open the dark utility closet. Empty. My pulse thudded in my ears, a frantic, echoing drumbeat. Leo never woke up before me. He was a notorious late sleeper, especially on weekends, and the unfamiliar surroundings should have kept him burrowed under his blankets. I scrambled up the wooden stairs, my breath catching in my throat, praying he had merely gone up to seek the warmth of the hearth. Pushing open the basement door, a wave of forced air heating washed over my shivering frame. The main floor was quiet, smelling of expensive roasted coffee beans and lingering wood smoke from the night before. I scanned the vaulted living room. The leather sofas were unoccupied. My parents' guest wing door remained firmly shut. From the upstairs loft, the muffled, digitized sound of a virtual reality game echoed down the hallway. Amber and Tyler, teenage sons, were already awake, safely ensconced in their heated domain, shooting digital zombies. But my little boy was nowhere to be seen. I moved toward the kitchen, my anxiety morphing into a cold dread. That is when I saw movement through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels that overlooked the expansive back deck. The mountain temperature had plummeted overnight to a brutal 15 degrees. A fresh layer of snow blanketed the pines, glittering under the pale morning sun. My heart dropped into my stomach. Out in the bitter elements, 50 yards down the sloped yard near the woodshed, was Leo. He wore his thin fall jacket, the one we usually layered with a heavy coat, which currently sat folded in his suitcase downstairs. His small 9-year-old frame buckled under the weight of 3 thick, wet logs. His hands, bare and unprotected by gloves, gripped the rough bark. He took a staggering step forward, his boots slipping on the slick terrain. He looked exhausted, his cheeks flushed a dangerous bright red against the freezing wind. Up on the elevated, heated deck, leaning against the cedar railing, stood Tyler. My brother-in-law wore a pristine, puffy designer jacket, insulated and immaculate. He held a ceramic mug, steam rising lazily from his fresh coffee. He looked like a model in a winter catalog, perfectly comfortable and entirely unbothered by the biting cold. "Come on, buddy," Tyler shouted, his voice muffled through the double-paned glass, but distinct enough to carry. "Build some character. Those fires do not stoke themselves. Chop, chop. We have a big day ahead." The careful, calculating strategist inside me vanished. The woman who had quietly chopped vegetables the night before, biding her time, was instantly replaced by a mother witnessing the exploitation of her child. The financial deception was one thing. Using my life savings to fund a fake empire was a betrayal I could manage tactically. But treating my son as disposable labor crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I did not pause to put on my boots. I did not grab a coat. I shoved the heavy glass sliding door open and charged out onto the frosted cedar deck. The 15-degree air hit my lungs like inhaled glass. The snow beneath my bare feet burned with a sharp, stinging pain, but adrenaline flooded my system, rendering the physical discomfort irrelevant. I bounded down the wooden steps, clearing the distance between the deck and the yard in seconds. Leo looked up, his eyes watering from the harsh wind. "Mom," he chattered, his jaw trembling. "Aunt Amber left a note on the basement stairs. She said the house needed to be warm for the guests and I had to start early." I did not speak. I reached out and ripped the heavy, damp logs out of his fragile arms. The rough bark scraped my palms, sending splinters into my skin. I tossed the timber roughly into the snow. I wrapped my arms around his freezing shoulders, pulling him against my side to share whatever body heat I possessed. His small hands were like ice. Tyler let out a loud, theatrical sigh from his perch on the deck. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. "Relax, Courtney," he drawled, rolling his eyes in exaggerated annoyance. "You are being such a helicopter mom. A little manual labor builds character. Boys need to learn how to work with their hands. It is good for him." I glared up at the deck, my bare feet going numb in the snow. "If manual labor builds so much character, Tyler, why are your two strapping teenage sons upstairs playing virtual reality video games? Why is my 9-year-old outside in freezing weather doing the heavy lifting while your children sit in a heated room?" Tyler leaned over the railing, a smug, entitled smirk spreading across his face. He looked down at me, clearly enjoying his perceived position of power. "Amber said you guys needed to pull your weight," he replied, his tone dripping with casual cruelty. "You are getting a free ride this weekend. The least you can do is help keep the place running while I prepare for my high net worth investors. Do not make a big deal out of nothing. We are family, right? Everyone pitches in." A free ride. The words hung in the frigid air, crystallizing the sheer depth of their delusion. Amber had not merely hidden my financial contribution. She had actively weaponized it. She had convinced her husband and my parents that I was a charity case, a financial burden who needed to be put to work to justify my presence. They were exploiting my child under the guise of paying off a debt that did not even exist. The fury inside me condensed into a single razor-sharp point. I squeezed Leo's shoulder gently. "Go inside, sweetie," I instructed, my voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity. "Go stand by the fire and warm up your hands. Do not touch another piece of wood today." Leo nodded, scurrying up the wooden stairs and slipping past Tyler into the warmth of the living room. I stood alone in the snow, the bitter wind whipping my hair across my face. Tyler watched me, expecting me to retreat, expecting me to lower my head and accept my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Instead, I walked slowly up the stairs until I was standing on the heated deck, mere inches from his pristine designer jacket. My bare feet left wet, melting footprints on the expensive cedar planks. I looked directly into his eyes. The smirk faltered on his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I leaned in close, letting the icy air carry my words. "You have no idea who is paying for your ride, Tyler." I turned my back on his confused, stammering response and walked inside. The game had fundamentally changed. It was no longer just about exposing a stolen vacation. It was about dismantling a toxic empire brick by brick. And the very next layer of their deception would reveal itself before the sun even set, proving that my sister's greed extended far beyond a simple lie. The winter sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Cascades, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. Inside the property, the atmosphere mirrored a frantic corporate staging ground. Tyler paced the living room, barking commands into his headset while adjusting a portable presentation screen for his morning investor pitch. Amber fluttered around him, adjusting throw pillows and fluffing the expensive woven blankets, ensuring the aesthetic was flawless for her incoming social media stories. I was sequestered in the gourmet kitchen, surrounded by piles of raw ingredients. Amber had handed me a menu that morning, demanding a sophisticated farm-to-table dinner. The counter was covered in local Oregon produce I had purchased with my own dwindling funds. Heirloom carrots, fingerling potatoes, fresh rosemary, and a heavy cut of grass-fed beef from a boutique Willamette Valley butcher. My back ached from standing on the hard slate floor all day. The heat from the double ovens radiated against my skin, mixing with the sharp, earthy scent of roasting garlic and searing meat. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, chopping, stirring, and plating. Every slice of the chef knife felt like a physical manifestation of my mounting frustration. I watched my sister through the glass partition. She was doing nothing but sipping sparkling water and pointing out smudges on the glass coffee table for me to clean later. She was playing the gracious host while I operated as the hidden engine keeping her charade alive. When I finally brought the heavy serving platters to the long rustic dining table, the family was already seated. Tyler poured wine, laughing loudly at a joke my father made. Leo sat quietly next to me, his small hands wrapped around a glass of apple juice, still looking exhausted from his morning ordeal in the freezing snow. We began to eat. The food was rich and perfectly seasoned, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. My mother set down her wine glass. Her eyes grew glassy with unshed tears in the soft glow of the Edison bulb chandelier. She reached across the polished wood and placed her hand over Amber's manicured fingers. "Amber," my mother said, her voice trembling with genuine emotion, "this meal is beautiful. This entire weekend is beautiful. Your father and I know how hard you work to maintain your brand. We know a luxury experience like this costs upward of $6,000. To spend that kind of money on us, to give us this memory, it means the world. We are so incredibly proud of the woman you have become." Amber squeezed our mother's hand. She offered a modest, practiced smile, dipping her chin just enough to catch the flattering overhead light. "You guys gave me everything growing up," Amber murmured smoothly. "It is my honor to spoil you. You deserve to be pampered." I stared at my plate, tracing the edge of a roasted carrot with the tines of my fork. The sheer theatricality of the moment was nauseating. She accepted their praise without a single flinch of conscience. Then, my father raised his glass. He looked at Amber with glowing admiration before shifting his gaze toward my end of the table. His expression shifted, softening into a look of patronizing pity. "And Courtney," my father added, raising his chin slightly, "thank you for stepping up and helping your sister out with the cooking and the cleaning today. It is a lot of work to maintain a property like this. Pitching in is the very least you can do when she treats you and Leo to a high-end vacation. It is good to see you showing some gratitude." My fork stopped moving. The metal tines pressed hard against the ceramic plate. A ringing sound echoed in my ears, drowning out the crackle of the fireplace. The very least I could do, showing gratitude. I looked at my father. He genuinely believed his words. He viewed me as a struggling, average data analyst who needed a handout from her glamorous, successful older sister. He believed I was paying off a debt for a free ride. I shifted my eyes to Amber. She was staring right back at me. A faint, triumphant smirk played on her lips. She was daring me to speak. She knew I would never ruin our parents' evening by launching a screaming match over money at the dinner table. She relied on my lifelong habit of swallowing my pride to keep the peace. I did not say a word. I forced my hand to relax, setting the fork down silently on a folded linen napkin. I offered my father a tight, close-lipped smile, acknowledging his statement without validating it. I would not give Amber the satisfaction of a public meltdown. Dinner concluded with Amber retreating to the master suite to film her nighttime skincare routine, citing exhaustion from hosting. Tyler vanished into the den to review his pitch deck. I was left alone to clear the heavy ceramic plates, scrape the leftover food, and load the stainless steel dishwasher. The mindless repetition of scrubbing pots offered a strange comfort, allowing my tactical mind to sort through the escalating tension. I realized we needed more paper towels from the supply closet near the guest wing. I dried my wet hands on a dish towel and walked quietly down the dimly lit hallway. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. As I neared the alcove where the guest bedrooms were located, I heard hushed voices drifting from the shadows. I stopped moving, pressing my shoulder against the cool, dry wall. It was Amber and my father. "I know it is a lot to ask, Dad," Amber was whispering. Her tone was entirely stripped of the confident, bubbly influencer persona. She sounded vulnerable, anxious, and desperate. I held my breath, straining to hear my father's response. "Amber, sweetheart, $6,000 is a very generous gift," my father said gently, "but $3,000 is a significant amount of cash for your mother and me to pull from our retirement savings on such short notice. We thought the hospitality brand covered all your expenses for promoting them." "They covered the main rental fee," Amber lied smoothly, her voice gaining traction as she wove the deception. "But they require a strict, refundable security deposit for incidentals and premium insurance. Since this property is so high-end, the hold is $3,000. My corporate accounts are tied up in a pending brand deal right now, and my personal card has a daily limit restriction. I just need you to write a check to float the deposit. The property manager will refund it directly to you on Monday morning. I promise." A cold chill swept down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. I leaned closer to the edge of the wall, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. "If I do not provide the deposit by tomorrow morning," Amber continued, pushing a subtle note of panic into her voice, "they will lock us out. Tyler will lose his venue for the investor meeting. His entire startup funding depends on this location, Dad. Please, I would never ask if it was not an emergency." I heard the distinct sound of a checkbook tearing. "Okay, golden girl," my father murmured, the affection clear in his tired voice. "Make it out to you or the management company." "Just make it out to me," Amber replied quickly. "I will wire it to them through my portal. Thank you, Dad. You are a lifesaver." I pressed my back flat against the wall, sliding quietly backward toward the kitchen before they could emerge from the alcove. The hallway felt suffocating. The air grew thin. I stood, gripping the edge of the granite kitchen island, staring blankly at the soapy water in the sink. The magnitude of the betrayal shattered every preconceived notion I held about my sister. Amber had not merely hijacked the credit for the $6,200 booking. She was actively utilizing my secret payment as bait to defraud our parents. She had orchestrated a scenario where she could squeeze $3,000 out of their fixed retirement income, promising a refund that would never arrive because there was no brand deal, there was no corporate hold. There was only Amber, drowning in debt, using my money to trap our parents in a financial scam. She planned to pocket their check to fund her own lifestyle, likely paying off Tyler's leased luxury car or her own maxed-out credit lines, leaving our parents to absorb the devastating loss when the phantom refund failed to materialize. My shock slowly evaporated, leaving behind a profound, icy clarity. The gloves were off. I looked out the kitchen window into the pitch-black Oregon wilderness. The wind howled through the pines, a relentless, punishing force. For 34 years, I had been the family peacekeeper. I had bitten my tongue, absorbed the insults, and quietly subsidized their delusions to maintain harmony. I had allowed them to hand me a chore chart and force my son into the freezing snow because I believed family required sacrifice. But this was not family. This was parasitism. I dried my hands one final time. I would not confront her tonight. A confrontation tonight would just lead to denials, gaslighting, and tearful manipulations. I needed an audience. I needed the stakes to be inescapable. Tyler wanted to impress his venture capitalists tomorrow morning. Amber wanted to play the wealthy, generous host. They wanted the spotlight. I decided right then and there to give it to them. I would let the morning arrive. I would let the guests pull into the driveway. My silence was no longer a sign of submission. My silence had just transformed into a loaded weapon, and I knew exactly when I was going to pull the trigger. Dawn broke over the Cascade Mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pale violet and cold gold. Inside the luxury Eco Lodge, the atmosphere was anything but serene. The sprawling main floor resembled the aftermath of a localized hurricane. During the night, while I lay awake plotting my next move on a freezing basement mattress, Amber and Tyler permitted their teenagers to treat the $6,000 rental like a fraternity house. Crushed aluminum soda cans littered the expensive woven rugs. A half-eaten pepperoni pizza sat open on the granite kitchen island, the grease coagulating into unappetizing orange pools on the pristine stone. Muddy boot tracks formed a chaotic trail from the back deck's sliding glass doors all the way to the plush living room sofas, bringing in clumps of melting snow and dark pine needles. I sat in a high-backed leather armchair near the hearth, the fire I had stoked crackling softly, pushing back the morning chill. A mug of dark roast coffee warmed my palms. Beside me, Leo sat cross-legged on the rug, dressed in his heavy winter coat and boots, quietly sketching in a notebook. Tucked neatly behind the sweeping curve of the glass staircase, entirely out of sight, sat our packed duffel bags. We were ready. The heavy oak door of the master suite clicked open. Tyler jogged down the stairs, bringing a wave of sharp, overpowering designer cologne with him. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked comically out of place in a rustic mountain setting. He stopped at the bottom step, taking in the devastation of the living room. His jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched visibly beneath his skin. He pulled back the cuff of his crisp white shirt, staring at the face of his oversized silver watch. A sheen of perspiration gleamed on his forehead despite the cool draft drifting from the large windows. "This place is a disaster," Tyler hissed, his voice tight with rising panic. He began pacing the length of the hardwood floor, his leather dress shoes clicking sharply against the timber. He dialed a number on his phone, held it to his ear, and ended the call a second later in frustration. "They are 10 minutes away. My seed investors are 10 minutes away from pulling up to this driveway, and the place smells like stale cheese and wet dog." He did not look at me. He did not acknowledge Leo. To Tyler, we were merely fixtures in the room, background props in the theater of his impending financial triumph. He darted into the kitchen, haphazardly throwing empty soda cans into a plastic bin, cursing under his breath. The illusion of the effortless, wealthy entrepreneur was fracturing under the pressure of actual deadlines. A moment later, Amber rushed down the staircase. She wore tight black leggings and an oversized designer sweater, her hair pulled back into a severe, sleek ponytail. The moment her eyes landed on the muddy footprints staining the woven rugs, the color drained from her cheeks. Her curated, carefree influencer persona vanished, replaced by sheer, unfiltered desperation. "Tyler, why is this room not clean?" Amber demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I told you to make sure the boys picked up after themselves last night." "Do not put this on me," Tyler snapped, pointing a trembling finger toward the kitchen island. "I am prepping the pitch deck. You are supposed to manage the house. Fix this. My entire company valuation rests on this morning going smoothly. If those venture capitalists walk in here and see a pigsty, they will drive right back down the mountain." Amber spun around, her eyes darting across the room until they locked onto me. I sat perfectly still, taking a slow, measured sip of my coffee. The dark liquid burned pleasantly on its way down. The knowledge of her deceit, the secret $3,000 check she had stolen from our father the night before, sat like a heavy, loaded weapon in my lap. She had no idea the ground beneath her feet had already collapsed. Her gaze hardened. She marched past the living area, her footsteps heavy and deliberate, and yanked open the door to the utility closet. She rummaged inside, metal buckets clanking together, until she emerged clutching a long wooden mop with a damp gray sponge head. She stormed across the room, stopping directly in front of my armchair. Without a word of greeting, she thrust the wooden handle forward, shoving it hard against my chest. The damp sponge grazed my sweater, leaving a dark, wet stain on the wool. "Get up," Amber ordered, her tone devoid of any familial warmth. "Tyler's guests are almost here. I need the floors sanitized, the kitchen sterilized, and every trace of that pizza gone." I did not reach for the handle. I let the mop clatter onto the floor between us. I looked at the dirty gray sponge, then slowly lifted my gaze to meet her eyes. Amber placed her hands on her hips, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Did you hear me? We have 10 minutes. Once the kitchen is presentable, you and Leo need to take your things and stay hidden in the basement until the pitch meeting is over. I cannot have you wandering around looking like the hired help while Tyler is trying to secure funding." The audacity of the statement was a marvel to witness. She had invited me to a property I paid for, tasked me with scrubbing her children's filth, and then demanded I hide in an unheated cellar so my very existence would not embarrass her husband. I placed my coffee mug onto the side table. The ceramic base clicked softly against the wood. I stood up, ensuring I was at eye level with her. I smoothed the front of my sweater, brushing away the damp spot she had created. "Guests do not clean," I said. My voice was low, even, and entirely devoid of anger. Amber stared at me, blinking rapidly as if I had just spoken a foreign language. Her face contorted into a mask of pure disbelief. Then she let out a sharp, mocking laugh. The sound was harsh, dripping with a toxic condescension that had defined our relationship for over 3 decades. "A guest," Amber scoffed, shaking her head. "Courtney, you are not a guest. You are here on my dime." She took a step closer, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Mom and Dad are guests. You are a charity case. I brought you along because I felt sorry for you. I gave you and your son a free mountain vacation because I knew you could never afford to step foot in a place like this on your own." Tyler paused his frantic pacing, turning to watch the confrontation, a satisfied smirk returning to his lips. He crossed his arms over his tailored suit, clearly enjoying watching his wife put me in my supposed place. "So let us get one thing very clear," Amber continued, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous whisper. "If you are not going to pull your weight, if you are not going to show a single ounce of gratitude for the gift I gave you, then leave. Leave." The word hung in the quiet room, echoing off the timber walls. She had laid down the ultimate ultimatum. She believed she held all the cards. She thought her threats carried weight because she still operated under the delusion that her web of lies remained intact. She expected me to shrink, to apologize, to pick up the mop and scrub the floors to earn my keep. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the terrifyingly calm expression of a person who has spent their entire life playing by the rules, only to realize the game was rigged all along. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated, casting a soft glow over my fingers. I bypassed my lock screen and tapped the icon for the luxury property rental application. "What are you doing?" Amber demanded, her mocking laugh fading into a sudden, sharp prick of uncertainty. "Pick up the mop, Courtney." I did not look at the mop. I looked directly into my sister's eyes, watching the first tiny cracks of realization splinter across her confident facade. The trap I had meticulously laid since the night before was finally springing shut, and there was nothing she could do to stop the incoming devastation. The screen of my smartphone illuminated my face in the dim morning light. My thumb hovered over the red button on the rental application. Amber stood mere inches away, her manicured hands still resting on her hip, waiting for me to yield. She expected me to pocket the device, grab the dirty mop she had thrown at my feet, and begin scrubbing the pine needles from the woven rug. "Canceling reservation number 4471 right now," I said. My voice was steady, cutting through the heavy tension in the room like a sharp blade. But I did not just press the button. A simple digital cancellation would trigger an automatic review process, potentially leaving the booking active for another 24 hours. I needed immediate, irreversible action. I closed the application and opened my keypad. I dialed the direct emergency line for the local property management company. I tapped the speaker icon, ensuring the audio would broadcast loudly across the vaulted living room. A harsh, rhythmic ringing tone echoed off the timber ceilings. Amber lowered her arm. The smug confidence began to drain from her features, replaced by a flickering confusion. "What are you doing?" she demanded, taking a step forward. "Who are you calling?" I held up a hand, signaling her to remain silent. The ringing stopped. A crisp, professional female voice filled the space. "Cascade Mountain Luxury Rentals, this is Brenda speaking. How can I assist you today?" "Good morning, Brenda," I replied, keeping my tone polite and measured. "My name is Courtney Young. I am the primary leaseholder for the property at Eagle Ridge Drive, reservation number 4471. Tyler stopped pacing near the kitchen island. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. Primary leaseholder. He muttered the phrase under his breath, trying to decipher the meaning. "Yes, Miss Young," the agent said, the sound of typing clicking rapidly in the background. "I see your file right here. You are checked in for a 3-night stay. Is there an emergency?" "There is a compliance issue," I stated clearly, maintaining eye contact with my sister. As a data analyst, I possess a distinct habit of reading every line of terms and conditions before signing any contract. I knew the specific regulations governing this high-end eco-lodge. They maintained a rigorous residential-only policy to protect the quiet integrity of the neighborhood. I am calling to report a direct violation of the host rules. The current occupants are actively hosting an unauthorized commercial pitch meeting. The color vanished entirely from Amber's face. Her skin turned a ghostly pallid white. She lunged forward, reaching for my phone with clawed fingers. "Hang up that phone right now," she hissed, her voice cracking with sudden terror. I stepped back neatly, avoiding her grasp. I kept the device raised high. "An unauthorized commercial event," the property manager repeated, her professional tone instantly shifting to a rigid, authoritative register. "Miss Young, our contracts explicitly forbid using the premises for business conferences, investor pitches, or any commercial gatherings. Doing so is a severe breach of the rental agreement." "I am well aware," I responded. "There are high-net-worth venture capitalists arriving at this location in less than 10 minutes for a catered startup presentation. The individual running the event is named Tyler, and he does not hold authorization to utilize this residence for corporate gain." Tyler dropped the handful of trash he had been holding. The empty soda cans clattered loudly against the granite countertop. He sprinted across the hardwood floor, his leather dress shoes slipping slightly on a wet patch of melted snow. "Give me the device," Tyler ordered, his chest heaving as he reached for my hand. "Tell her it is a misunderstanding. Tell her you made a mistake." I ignored his demands. I spoke directly into the microphone. "Because of this egregious violation, I am terminating my lease effectively immediately. I am forfeiting my deposit and requesting an emergency void of the stay." "Understood, Miss Young." the agent replied firmly. Based on the commercial violation, the booking is officially voided. I am dispatching our local enforcement officer to the property right now. They will arrive shortly to secure the premises. Thank you for reporting this. The line clicked dead. Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. The crackle of the fireplace sounded deafening in the sudden quiet. Then, the door to the guest wing swung open. My father marched into the living room, tying the belt of his thick fleece robe. My mother trailed close behind him, looking bewildered by the sudden commotion. John had clearly heard the end of the phone call. His face was flushed with paternal indignation. "Courtney," my father barked, his voice booming across the open space. "What on earth is going on out here? Why are you harassing your sister? She worked incredibly hard to provide this beautiful weekend for us. Why are you calling management and ruining Amber's booking?" I turned to face him. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life placing my sister on an untouchable pedestal while treating me as a convenient afterthought. The man who had thanked me for cleaning up after the daughter he believed paid for everything. "It was never Amber's booking, Dad," I said. My words hung in the air, foreign and sharp. My father stopped walking. He frowned, shaking his head as if he had misheard me. "What are you talking about?" John asked, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "She partnered with the brand. She paid for the trip." "No, she did not," I corrected him, my voice unwavering. "Her credit card declined a week ago. The brand deal was a lie. She panicked and sent me a private message begging for a bailout so she could save face. I paid the $6,200 invoice. The charge cleared my personal bank account. I hold the lease in my name, and I just terminated it." The air seemed to leave the room. John stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He shifted his gaze toward his eldest daughter, searching for a quick denial, a laugh, any sign that I was playing a cruel joke. But Amber did not laugh. Instead, the dam broke. She began to scream. It was not a normal shout. It was a high-pitched, frantic wail of a person watching their meticulously constructed false reality shatter into dust. "Do not listen to her," Amber shrieked, waving her hands wildly in the air. "She is lying. She is insane. She is having a mental breakdown. Courtney has always been jealous of me. She cannot handle my success, so she is making up crazy stories to destroy my gift to you. Mom, tell her to stop. She is trying to ruin our family." My mother shrank back against the wall, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Carol looked between the two of us, paralyzed by the sudden, vicious explosion of conflict. Tyler ignored the family drama entirely. His mind was hyper-focused on the impending collapse of his own deceit. His face turned a deep, mottled shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against the collar of his tailored shirt. He realized the $1 million backdrop he needed to secure his seed funding was evaporating mere minutes before his VIP guests were scheduled to pull into the driveway. "You stupid, petty woman," Tyler snarled, taking a threatening step toward me. His hands curled into tight fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what you have just done? My investors are driving up the mountain right now. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars riding on this presentation today. You are costing me a fortune because you threw a tantrum over a mop." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the angry man standing before me, recognizing him for the hollow shell he truly was, a man who leased cars he could not afford, who belittled my honest career, and who sent my young child out into the freezing snow to haul heavy timber for his own comfort. I turned away from his furious gaze. I walked calmly toward the glass staircase where my belongings waited. I bent down and picked up Leo's heavy winter coat. My son stood quietly, his wide eyes taking in the chaos, trusting me to guide him through the storm. I knelt on the floor and helped Leo slide his arms into the insulated sleeves. I pulled the zipper up to his chin, ensuring he was warm and protected against the harsh mountain winter. I shrugged on my own waterproof jacket, adjusting the collar around my neck. I picked up my duffel bag and slung the thick canvas strap over my shoulder. Tyler continued to shout, hurling insults and demanding I call the management company back to reverse the cancellation. Amber sobbed loudly, clinging to our father's arm, spinning increasingly desperate lies about her supposed wealth and my supposed jealousy. I stood up and faced the room one last time. "The property manager is on her way," I announced. My tone was clinical, delivering the facts with the precision of a final verdict. You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate this premises before you are legally trespassing on private property. The ticking clock had officially started, and as the reality of their impending eviction settled over them, the true depth of Amber's financial deception was about to be laid bare, forcing our parents to finally see the ugly truth hidden behind the golden child's smile. The 30 minutes ticking down felt remarkably like breathing underwater. The atmosphere inside the vaulted living room grew incredibly dense, heavy with the impending collision of reality and delusion. I remained standing near the entryway, my heavy winter coat zipped tight against the lingering chill. My hand rested securely on Leo's shoulder. He stayed perfectly quiet, sensing the massive shift in gravity occurring around us. Across the room, Tyler exhibited all the physical symptoms of a man watching his fictional empire burn to the ground. He paced the length of the hardwood floor in rapid, erratic strides. His leather dress shoes clicked frantically against the timber. A thick sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, catching the glare of the morning sun piercing through the glass panels. He furiously tapped his smartphone screen, dialing numbers, muttering desperate phrases about seed funding, capital allocation, and venture backing. His tailored charcoal suit, previously a symbol of his supposed superiority, now looked like a suffocating straitjacket on a panicking imposter. Amber utilized the waiting period to double down on her fabricated narrative. She clung tightly to our father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the sleeve of his fleece robe. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup, as she spun an elaborate web of lies. She whispered frantically, claiming the stress of my mundane corporate job had finally broken my mind. She insisted I was experiencing a psychotic episode, driven mad by a deep-seated jealousy of her glamorous influencer lifestyle. My mother sat frozen on the edge of the leather sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Carol watched the chaotic scene unfold with wide, bewildered eyes, unable to process how her tranquil mountain retreat had suddenly mutated into a vicious battleground. I observed their frantic scrambling with a detached, clinical fascination. As a data analyst, I spend my career charting inevitable outcomes based on fixed variables. The variables here were simple. I held the lease, they broke the rules. The outcome was mathematically certain. I did not need to scream, cry, or defend my sanity. I simply needed to let the clock run out. Exactly half an hour after I ended my phone call, the distinct, rhythmic crunch of heavy tires rolling over compacted ice shattered the tense silence of the cabin. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, a large black SUV pulled into the snowy driveway, throwing the transmission into park directly behind Tyler's dead battery electric vehicle. A second vehicle pulled up immediately behind it, a white Ford Explorer bearing the bold, reflective decals of the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office. The cavalry had arrived. 3 sharp, authoritative knocks echoed against the heavy oak front door. I reached forward and pulled the brass handle, swinging the timber wide open. A blast of frigid alpine air swept into the foyer, bringing with it 2 incredibly imposing figures. The property manager stepped across the threshold first. She was a tall, no-nonsense Oregonian woman with steel gray hair tucked sensibly underneath a thick wool beanie. She wore a rugged canvas work jacket, faded denim jeans, and heavy-duty snow boots that left wet tracks on the entryway rug. She carried a metal clipboard clamped firmly under her left arm. Flanking her right side was a broad-shouldered sheriff's deputy. His tan uniform was crisp, a silver star pinned perfectly to his chest. He stood with a calm, practiced stillness, his thumbs resting casually along his heavy-duty belt. His mere presence instantly sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. Courtney Young, the property manager, asked, her voice projecting with a booming, gravelly authority that demanded absolute attention. I stepped forward, meeting her stern gaze. I am Courtney Young. The manager nodded, flipping a page on her clipboard. Your emergency cancellation request and your report regarding an unauthorized commercial violation have been fully confirmed by our system. As the primary leaseholder, your request to void the stay is granted. She turned her attention toward the center of the living room, her eyes sweeping over Amber, Tyler, and my bewildered parents. Her expression hardened into a look of absolute zero tolerance. To the rest of you occupants, this lease is officially terminated. The premises must be vacated immediately. The official declaration hit the room like a physical shockwave. Tyler completely lost whatever tiny shred of composure he had managed to retain. He lunged forward, his face flushing a dangerous mottled crimson. He stopped a few feet away from the deputy, his hands gesturing wildly in the air. "You cannot kick us out," Tyler bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. "You have absolutely no right to do this. I have high net worth clients arriving at this exact location in less than 10 minutes. Do you understand the magnitude of the capital involved here? I am hosting a critical startup presentation. You are going to cost me millions of dollars if you force us to leave right now." The property manager did not even blink. She leveled a flat, unimpressed stare at my brother-in-law. "Sir, I do not care if you are hosting the president of the bank. This is a strictly residential eco-lodge. Commercial events, pitch meetings, and business conferences are a direct violation of our host rules. You broke the terms of the contract, and the legal leaseholder has revoked your access. You are leaving." Amber released her grip on our father's arm. She marched forward, throwing her shoulders back, attempting to deploy the digital armor she relied on to bully service workers and retail employees. She angled her face, projecting her most haughty, entitled influencer persona. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Amber demanded, her voice dripping with toxic condescension. "I have 80,000 followers online. My audience trusts my recommendations implicitly. If you force my family out into the cold, I will go live on my channels right now. I will destroy this cabin's reputation. I will make sure your little rental company goes completely bankrupt by tomorrow morning." The manager let out a dry, humorless chuckle. She had clearly dealt with entitled tourists attempting to leverage imaginary internet power before. "Ma'am, your internet followers do not supersede property laws in the state of Oregon." I decided it was time to deploy the final piece of evidence. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the rigid plastic schedule I had found on my freezing basement bed. I stepped forward and handed the laminated document directly to the property manager. "Furthermore," I added smoothly, gesturing toward the chart, "these occupants attempted to utilize unauthorized, unpaid domestic staff during their stay, assigning heavy manual labor to a minor child, while scheduling themselves for hot tub relaxation. I believe that violates your liability insurance clauses as well." The manager glanced down at the bubbly cursive font detailing the grueling chore list assigned to me and Leo. Her eyes narrowed in deep disgust. She looked back up at Amber, her jaw set in stone. "Ma'am, you are not the leaseholder," the manager stated, her voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. "Ms. Young holds the legal rights to this property. Your internet threats mean absolutely nothing here. You have exactly 5 minutes to gather your belongings and exit the front door. If you are still standing on these hardwood floors when that time expires, this deputy will gladly arrest you for criminal trespassing." The deputy took a single, deliberate step forward, resting his hand gently on his radio. The absolute crushing weight of legal reality finally crashed down upon the Golden family. Amber's mouth fell open, rendering her completely speechless. The realization hit her that her social media metrics, her curated aesthetics, and her manipulative tears were entirely useless against a sworn officer of the law enforcing a binding legal contract. Tyler stared at the deputy's badge, his chest heaving, his fake corporate empire dissolving into thin air under the harsh light of law enforcement. Behind them, John and Carol stood entirely frozen in the center of the living room. The dynamic of our family had just been violently inverted before their very eyes. For 34 years, they had viewed me as the quiet, invisible, submissive daughter. They had assumed I possessed no power, no backbone, and no authority. Now, they watched in stunned, breathless silence as I commanded a room containing armed law enforcement, effortlessly dismantling their favorite daughter's grand illusion. They realized with terrifying clarity that the child they had banished to the basement held the absolute, indisputable keys to the castle, and she had just firmly locked them all outside in the snow. The ticking clock of the 5-minute ultimatum began to count down, and as desperation finally eclipsed their arrogance, my mother would make one last tragic attempt to demand my compliance, forcing me to unveil the final, devastating receipts that would obliterate their golden child forever. The 5-minute warning hung in the frigid mountain air, ticking down with a relentless, invisible rhythm. The property manager remained planted by the foyer, her clipboard pressed firmly against her canvas jacket. The sheriff deputy did not flinch, his stoic gaze sweeping over the paralyzed occupants of the living room. Tyler stood frozen near the kitchen island, his chest rising and falling in erratic, shallow gasps. His custom-tailored suit suddenly resembled a cage rather than armor. Amber had retreated until her spine hit the timber wall, her manicured fingers twisting the fabric of her designer sweater. The digital fantasy she had spun for her internet followers was evaporating under the harsh glare of law enforcement. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the crackle of the hearth and the distant, static hiss of the deputy radio. The balance of power had shifted so drastically that the very foundation of the room felt tilted. Then, the shock broke. My mother, who had spent decades smoothing over every fracture in our family facade, could no longer endure the tension. Carol shuffled forward, her fuzzy slippers dragging across the hardwood floor. Tears carved shiny paths through her careful makeup. Her hands fluttered in front of her, reaching out toward me in a gesture of desperate, ingrained expectation. Throughout my entire childhood, whenever Amber broke a rule, missed a deadline, or ruined an event, my mother turned to me to quietly sweep up the debris. She expected the same service now. "Courtney, please," my mother pleaded. Her voice cracked, tight with panic and unshed tears. "Just give the woman your credit card again. Give her the number so we can stay. Your sister made a mistake. She got confused with her accounts. But we are family. Do not do this to us. Do not ruin the weekend." The demand hit me like a physical blow. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her request echoed in my ears. After everything that had transpired, after watching Amber assign me a domestic chore list, after seeing my 9-year-old son sent into the freezing snow, my mother still viewed me as the designated shock absorber. She wanted me to hand over my financial information, absorb the indignity, and pretend none of this had happened, all to protect Amber from the consequences of her own deceit. That blind, reflexive enabling was the final straw. The lifelong conditioning that had kept me silent shattered into dust. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or waste my breath explaining why her request was insulting. Words had never worked in this family. They always twisted explanations into excuses. They needed undeniable, hard data. I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket. I unlocked the screen, swiped past my homepage, and tapped the stark white icon of my banking application. Face recognition granted me immediate access. I navigated directly to the Recent Transactions tab. I set the screen brightness to its highest level, ensuring the digital ink would be unmistakable. I turned the device around and held it steady in front of my mother's face. My father, drawn by the sudden movement, stepped away from the sofa and leaned in to look over her shoulder. "Look at the top line, Dad," I instructed, my voice maintaining a clinical, icy calm. John squinted, adjusting his reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. The glow of the screen illuminated the deep lines etched around his eyes. He read the bold black text aloud, his voice starting strong but tapering into a confused whisper. "Cascade Mountain Luxury Rentals. Point of sale charge, $6,200. Status cleared." He stared at the number. He looked at the date attached to the transaction. It was processed a full 7 days before we arrived in Bend. The timeline was irrefutable. The money had exited my personal checking account, bearing my name, utilizing my hard-earned funds. "But Amber said the brand partnered with her," my father stammered, his eyes darting from my phone to my face. "She said they covered the cost. She told us she finalized the payments." I tapped the top left corner of the screen, exiting the banking portal, and opening my text message application. I scrolled down to the thread containing my sister name. I bypassed the group chats, the exclamation points, and the fake excitement. I found the direct, private messages sent on that rainy Tuesday afternoon in Portland. I held the phone higher, forcing my father to read the raw, unedited truth. "Read it," I said softly. "Read exactly what your generous daughter told me while you were calling her the Golden Girl." John reached out with a trembling, calloused hand. He gripped the edge of my device to steady it. His eyes tracked across the illuminated text bubbles. The silence in the room deepened, growing so profound I could hear the erratic rhythm of his breathing. "The property manager wants a card on file and mine just declined," John read, his voice barely a rasp. "They will not hold the dates, Courtney. I need a huge favor. Can you cover the $6,200? I swear I will pay you back when my next brand deal hits." He paused, swallowing hard. The next sentence seemed to physically pain him to speak aloud. "Do not tell Mom and Dad. Let me have this win." John released my phone. His hand dropped to his side, heavy and limp. The grand illusion of his perfect, successful, generous eldest child shattered into a million jagged fragments on the timber floor. The carefully constructed narrative Amber had fed them for years dissolved, exposing the hollow, desperate fraud hiding underneath. The dramatic irony of the entire weekend reached its devastating peak. My parents had spent the last 48 hours drinking artisanal wine I purchased, sleeping in premium linen I rented, and marveling at a stunning view I secured. Yet they had directed all their gratitude, all their praise, and all their toasts to the woman who had contributed nothing. Worse, they had actively participated in my humiliation. They had thanked me for acting as Amber maid. They had watched me scrub dishes and prep meals, believing I was paying off a debt, never realizing I was the sole benefactor holding their luxurious vacation together. John turned his head slowly. He looked across the living room at Amber. My sister had shrunk back against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. The confident influencer who had threatened to destroy a business mere minutes ago was gone. In her place stood a terrified fraud, her mascara running in dark, ugly streaks down her pale cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some kind of spin or deflection, but no words materialized. The digital receipts were absolute. They offered no room for gaslighting or manipulation. "You lied to us," John whispered, the betrayal carving deep grooves into his expression. "You sat at that dinner table, you let your mother cry tears of joy over your generosity, and you let your sister cook your meals, knowing she paid for every single inch of this place." Amber hugged her arms around her chest, staring at the floor. "Dad, I can explain," she whimpered, her voice pitiful and thin. "I just wanted to do something nice for you. I wanted you to be proud of me. The brand deal is coming. It was just delayed, I swear." "You let me thank Courtney for helping you out," John continued, his voice rising, gaining a sharp, jagged edge. "You let me insult her. You let Tyler send my grandson out into the freezing snow to haul firewood, claiming they needed to pull their weight for a free ride." The gravity of his own actions hit him. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a horrified, gut-wrenching guilt. He remembered his toast. He remembered his condescending smile. He realized the sheer magnitude of the disrespect I had silently absorbed while ensuring he had a comfortable chair by the hearth. "I am so sorry, Courtney," John choked out, stepping toward me. "I had no idea. We had no idea." "I know you did not," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the old familiar ache. "Because she made sure you only saw what she wanted you to see." The sheriff deputy cleared his throat, tapping his index finger against the face of his tactical watch. 3 minutes, folks," the officer announced. "I suggest you start gathering your personal items." The countdown resumed, adding a frantic, pulsing urgency to the devastating emotional fallout. Amber let out a fresh sob, her hands covering her face. Tyler stared blankly at the floor, his mind short-circuiting as his high-stakes venture capital meeting vanished into thin air. But the reckoning was far from finished. As John processed the staggering number he had just read on my screen, a new, much darker calculation began to formulate behind his eyes. The math was clicking into place. If I had paid the entire rental fee a week ago, another financial transaction suddenly made zero logical sense. The grief and guilt on my father's face hardened into something terrifyingly cold, signaling that the ultimate theft was about to be dragged out into the blinding mountain sunlight. The sheriff deputy had just issued his temporal warning, but time seemed to warp and stretch within the confines of the vaulted living room. I watched my father carefully. The crushing guilt that had softened his features only a moment prior began to curdle into something sharp, cold, and unforgiving. His eyes, usually warm and accommodating when directed at his eldest daughter, narrowed into focused, calculating slits. The gears in his mind were turning with brutal efficiency, aligning the irrefutable digital timestamp on my phone with the hushed, desperate conversation he had participated in near the guest wing only 12 hours earlier. A dark, stormy realization washed over his weathered face. He turned his head, slowly locking his gaze onto Amber. The posture of the proud, enabling patriarch vanished entirely. In his place stood an aging man who realized he had been played for an absolute fool. "Amber," my father began, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling with a suppressed, uncharacteristic fury that I had never heard him use before. Amber flinched, pressing her spine flat against the timber wall as if trying to merge with the architecture. If Courtney paid the entire $6,200 rental fee a week ago, John stated, emphasizing each syllable with deliberate, heavy precision, if the property was fully secured in her name before we even packed our bags in Portland to drive up here. He paused, taking a slow, steadying breath. The air in the room grew thick and suffocating. Then why did you ask me for a $3,000 check last night for a security deposit? He finished. The silence that followed his question was profound. It was a dense, physical entity that settled over our shoulders, choking out the remaining oxygen in the room. The crackle of the stone hearth and the distant howling mountain wind only amplified the sheer devastation of the inquiry. The math was impossible to deny, and the implication was horrifying. My mother gasped aloud. Carol's hand flew to her chest, her fingers gripping the fabric of her flannel pajama top, as if her heart might physically burst through her ribs. Her knees seemed to lose their structural integrity, forcing her to sink backward onto the edge of the leather sofa. She stared at Amber, her wide eyes brimming with fresh, horrified tears. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her heart in real time. The daughter she had worshipped, the woman she had praised just hours ago for her boundless generosity, had not merely lied about a free vacation. She had actively orchestrated a financial extraction, leveraging a fake corporate policy to drain her parents' meager savings. Amber opened her mouth, but only a pathetic, trembling squeak emerged. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for a lifeline, a scapegoat, any distraction to derail the interrogation. She looked at Tyler, hoping her husband would intervene, but Tyler was staring at the floor, his jaw tight, his own carefully constructed facade cracking under the immense pressure of the moment. "Answer me!" John demanded, his voice cracking like a whip across the open space. "Where did my retirement money go?" The pressure broke her completely. Amber burst into loud, jagged sobs. The polished influencer aesthetic melted away entirely, leaving behind a terrified, cornered fraud. Her hands shook as she wiped the dark streaks of ruined mascara from her cheeks, smudging the expensive makeup into a messy, chaotic blur. "I needed it," Amber wailed, her voice shrill, defensive, and dripping with a pathetic sense of victimhood. "The brand deal fell through weeks ago, Dad. We are drowning in bills. Everything is so expensive, and Tyler's startup is bleeding cash every single day." She pointed a trembling finger toward the pristine white vehicle parked out in the icy driveway. The Tesla lease was 3 months past due. They were going to repossess it on Monday morning. How was Tyler supposed to pitch wealthy venture capitalists if they saw him driving a repossessed car? He needed to project wealth to secure the funding. We had to keep up appearances. My father stared at her, the betrayal etching deep, permanent lines into his forehead. "You stole $3,000 from my fixed income to pay for a luxury car lease." "It was not just the car," Amber stammered, folding inward, curling her arms around her stomach as if bracing for a physical blow. "I had to buy the outfits, the designer coats, the cashmere sweaters, the boots. These investors expect a certain lifestyle, Dad. I had to look the part on social media so they would trust our brand. I thought Tyler would close the deal today and we could just pay you back from his seed capital. We were going to pay it back. I swear we were going to pay it back." The overlapping layers of their financial ruin were staggering to witness. The reality was laid bare for everyone in the room to digest, a toxic stew of entitlement and desperation. Amber was entirely broke, funding a fake internet lifestyle on credit she could no longer access. Tyler was exposed as a hollow imposter, a man who boasted about high net worth associates while secretly relying on stolen pensioner funds to avoid vehicular repossession. My parents, who had lived frugally their entire lives, working double shifts to build their modest nest egg, realized they had been mercilessly extorted by their favorite child. And I stood near the entryway, my winter coat zipped high, holding my son's hand, feeling an overwhelming sense of vindication. I had not destroyed their empire. I had simply turned on the lights and let them look at the rot they built themselves. Tyler lifted his head. The shame of his exposed poverty morphed instantly into a defensive, venomous rage. He could not attack his father-in-law, and he could not attack the sheriff deputy standing by the door. So, true to form, he aimed his vitriol directly at the easiest target in the room. "This is your fault," Tyler snarled, taking a threatening heavy step toward me. His fists were clenched tight at his sides, his knuckles stark white. "If you had just kept your mouth shut and scrubbed the floors like you were told, none of this would be happening. You set us up. You waited until the worst possible moment to cancel the lease, just to humiliate us. You are destroying my company because you are a bitter, jealous spinster who cannot stand to see us succeed." I did not even have to formulate a response. Before I could draw breath to defend myself, a sudden, swift movement caught my eye. My father stepped directly into Tyler's path. John placed himself squarely between me and his furious son-in-law. The symbolic weight of the gesture was staggering. For over 3 decades, my father had always sided with Amber and Tyler. He had always prioritized their comfort over my dignity, assuming I was strong enough to absorb their blows. Now, standing in the ruins of their deception, he finally shielded the correct daughter. "Do not speak to Courtney that way," John ordered. His tone possessed a lethal, quiet authority that made Tyler instantly freeze in his tracks. "You will not blame her for your failures. She did not force you to live beyond your means. She did not force you to steal from my bank account to fund your fake lifestyle." Tyler opened his mouth to argue, attempting to salvage some shred of his wounded pride, but John raised a calloused hand, cutting him off entirely. "I want my $3,000 back," John stated, his eyes locked onto Amber, weeping form. "Right now. You will open your banking application, you will initiate a wire transfer, and you will return every single cent you squeezed out of me last night. I do not care if they repossess your car. I do not care if you have to return your designer clothes to the boutique. You will return my money before we walk out that front door." The pedestal upon which the golden child had rested for 34 years did not just topple. It was pulverized into fine dust, swept away by the harsh wind of reality. The illusion was dead. There was no recovering from this theft, no charming smile or bubbly social media post that could erase the sight of an elderly man realizing his daughter viewed him as a disposable funding source. Amber sobbed harder, shaking her head frantically. "I cannot, Dad. I already spent it. The payments cleared this morning to stop the repossession. My accounts are empty. I have nothing left to give you." The sheriff deputy cleared his throat again, stepping slightly forward into the room, his boots thudding against the timber floor. "Time is up, folks," the officer announced, his deep voice leaving no room for negotiation or further family drama. "Grab your bags. You are vacating the premises right now. Let us move." The chaotic scramble that ensued was pitiful to observe. Stripped of their arrogance and their leverage, Tyler and Amber frantically dashed around the living room, grabbing loose charging cables, shoving designer shoes into their bags, and rushing their confused teenagers down the stairs. The property manager, exhibiting a profound lack of sympathy, handed them thick black garbage bags for the items that would not fit into their luxury luggage. Watching the glamorous lifestyle influencer and the arrogant crypto entrepreneur stuff their expensive cashmere sweaters into plastic trash bags offered a profound, deeply satisfying irony. I guided Leo toward the front door, stepping out onto the frost-covered porch. The icy morning air felt incredibly crisp and clean in my lungs, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. My mother followed slowly behind me, her shoulders slumped, her tear-stained face pale and hollow, mourning the daughter she thought she knew. My father walked out last, carrying a single overnight bag, his expression grim and resolute. As we gathered on the snowy driveway, the sound of heavy tires crunching on the packed ice drew my attention down the winding mountain road. 2 sleek, imposing black Range Rovers rounded the bend, their tinted windows reflecting the towering pine trees. They rolled to a smooth, silent stop directly behind the sheriff patrol vehicle. Tyler stumbled out the front door, clutching a plastic garbage bag full of clothes. He froze on the top step, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. The VIP investors had arrived, and they were perfectly on time to witness the brilliant architect of their impending startup venture being forcibly evicted by local law enforcement. The dual exhaust pipes of the 2 sleek black Range Rovers plumed thick white clouds into the freezing Oregon air. The heavy, studded snow tires crunched over the compacted ice of the driveway, coming to a smooth, synchronized halt right behind the sheriff patrol vehicle. The arrival was imposing, radiating a quiet, undeniable authority that instantly shifted the gravitational pull of the entire morning. Tyler froze on the top step of the cedar porch. He held a black plastic garbage bag stuffed haphazardly with his expensive tailored shirts and silk ties. For a fraction of a second, his brain failed to process the visual data in front of him. He stared at the luxury SUVs, then at the blinking lights of the law enforcement vehicle, and finally at the crumpled plastic bag in his own fist. The collision of his fabricated reality with actual, undeniable consequences caused a visible short circuit in his posture. He dropped the garbage bag. It hit the icy wooden stairs with a dull thud. A single designer leather loafer spilled out, tumbling down the snow-covered steps to land near my winter boots. Tyler did not bother to retrieve his shoe. He wiped his sweating palms on the thighs of his wrinkled suit trousers. He pasted a wide, frantic smile across his pale face, attempting to summon the charismatic crypto-entrepreneur persona he used to charm gullible investors. He scrambled down the stairs, his leather soles slipping dangerously on the frost, desperate to intercept his guests before they could interpret the disastrous scene unfolding in the driveway. I stood near the edge of the porch, holding my son's hand securely in mine. I watched the lead Range Rover door swing open. A tall, distinguished man stepped out into the biting winter cold. He wore a tailored charcoal wool overcoat over a pristine navy suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his sharp, calculating blue eyes immediately scanned the environment. He took in the grand architecture of the Eco Lodge, the scowling property manager holding her clipboard, the armed sheriff deputy standing watch, and the frantic, disheveled man sprinting toward him. I recognized him instantly. A profound, resonant sense of poetic justice settled deep within my chest. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales when you least expect it. The man adjusting his wool collar was Jonathan Carmichael. He was the vice president of operations at the premier Portland data analytics firm, where I had worked for the past 6 years. He was my boss. Mr. Carmichael was a man who built his fortune on raw data, predictive models, and uncompromising transparency. In the boardroom, he famously despised flashy presentations, empty buzzwords, and speculative promises. He demanded hard facts and rigorous due diligence. Tyler, a man whose entire career consisted of selling speculative digital tokens using aggressive marketing tactics and leased luxury props, was the exact antithesis of everything Jonathan Carmichael respected. Tyler reached the front of the Range Rover, breathless and panting, extending a trembling hand toward the older executive. "Mr. Carmichael," Tyler greeted, his voice cracking slightly under the immense strain of his panic. "I am so glad you made the drive up the mountain. Welcome to my property. We are dealing with a tiny, insignificant logistical hiccup with the local groundskeeper this morning. Nothing to worry about. If your team wants to remain in your vehicles, I can direct us to a premium country club in town to conduct our seed funding presentation over brunch." Jonathan Carmichael did not take the offered hand. He did not even look at Tyler's face. His sharp blue eyes had already bypassed the sweating imposter and locked directly onto me, standing quietly on the snow-dusted porch. A look of genuine surprise flickered across his stoic features, swiftly replaced by a warm, respectful recognition. He stepped deftly around Tyler's outstretched hand, ignoring the younger man entirely, and walked toward the wooden steps. "Courtney?" Mr. Carmichael called out, his deep voice carrying easily over the whistling mountain wind. "I certainly did not expect to find my senior data analyst standing in the freezing snow this morning." I offered a polite, professional smile, standing tall despite the bizarre circumstances. "Good morning, Mr. Carmichael. It is a surprise to see you here as well. I thought Human Resources approved your paid time off request so you could take your parents on a tranquil private retreat," he said, glancing at John and Carol, who stood huddled together near the front door, looking thoroughly bewildered by the exchange. "I did request the time off for that exact purpose," I replied, my tone remaining steady and factual. Unfortunately, the tranquility of the weekend was compromised by a severe breach of contract. Tyler spun around, his mouth hanging open in sheer, unadulterated shock. His eyes darted between me and the wealthy investor he had spent months courting. The cognitive dissonance was breaking his mind in real time. For years, Tyler had relentlessly mocked my career. He had called my corporate position a dead-end, boring, cubicle-bound existence, elevating his own speculative gambles as the true path to wealth. Now, the very man who signed my paychecks was the high-net-worth venture capitalist Tyler was begging for survival. "Wait," Tyler stammered, his voice rising to a frantic, high-pitched squeak. "You two know each other. How do you know each other?" Mr. Carmichael paused on the bottom step. He turned his head slowly, looking at Tyler with a mixture of profound confusion and growing distaste. "Ms. Young is the lead analyst for my entire Pacific Northwest division," Mr. Carmichael stated, his tone chillingly crisp. "She runs the predictive modeling teams that protect my firm from bad investments, fraudulent startups, and unreliable market actors. Her data is flawless. Who exactly are you?" "I am Tyler," he gasped, thumping a hand against his own chest. "I am the founder of the crypto venture you drove up here to evaluate. I am the owner of this lodge. We spoke on the phone last week." Mr. Carmichael frowned, his sharp intellect piecing the puzzle together at a rapid pace. He looked at the sheriff deputy, then at the property manager clutching her clipboard, and finally down at the plastic garbage bag resting in the slush near his expensive leather shoes. He turned his gaze back to me, seeking the unfiltered truth he knew I always delivered in the boardroom. "Courtney, would you mind providing a brief status report on the current situation?" "I would be happy to," I replied, my voice projecting clearly across the icy driveway, ensuring every single person present heard the undeniable facts. "I purchased the rental agreement for this luxury eco-cabin 7 days ago, utilizing my personal savings to gift my parents a peaceful vacation," I explained, delivering the data without a single drop of emotional embellishment. "Last night, I discovered this individual, Tyler, intended to utilize my private residential booking to host an unauthorized corporate pitch meeting to solicit seed funding. Because that violates the strict hosting terms of the property, I contacted management this morning and terminated my lease. He does not own this cabin. He is currently being evicted by local law enforcement for criminal trespassing." The silence that descended upon the driveway was heavy enough to crush bone. Jonathan Carmichael stared at Tyler. The look of distaste on the older executive face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He realized instantly that Tyler had intended to use a stolen, borrowed backdrop to fake a level of wealth and stability he did not possess. Worse, Tyler had attempted to exploit my financial resources to defraud my own employer. Tyler raised his hands, shaking his head frantically, his eyes wide with pleading desperation. "Mr. Carmichael, please, it is a misunderstanding. She is my sister-in-law. We had a minor family dispute over chores. She is just being vindictive. My startup metrics are solid. The blockchain algorithm I developed is revolutionary. You have to look at my pitch deck." The vice president of operations buttoned the top button of his wool overcoat, shielding his neck against the biting wind. He did not ask to see the pitch deck. He did not ask for further clarification. He had all the data he required to render a final verdict. "I do not do business with frauds who exploit their own family," Mr. Carmichael said. The words were delivered with a lethal, quiet finality. There was no room for negotiation. There was no margin for error. The rejection was absolute, echoing off the towering evergreen trees and sealing Tyler's fate forever. Mr. Carmichael turned back to me, offering a respectful nod. "Enjoy the rest of your time off, Courtney. I expect to see you back in the office on Wednesday. We have a new quarterly report that requires your sharp eyes." "Thank you, sir," I replied. "Safe travels down the mountain." Jonathan Carmichael turned on his heel, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the ice. He opened the heavy door of his Range Rover and slid into the plush leather interior. He signaled to the driver of the second vehicle. Without another word, both luxury SUVs shifted into reverse, their tires gripping the snow as they backed out of the long driveway. They turned onto the main mountain road and disappeared behind a thick grove of frosted pines, taking Tyler's entire future with them. Tyler stood in the center of the driveway, his arms hanging limp at his sides. The frigid wind whipped his unbuttoned suit jacket around his torso. His fake empire, built on credit card debt, arrogant lies, and my stolen resources, had just collapsed in real time. He had lost his funding, his dignity, and his leverage in the span of 3 minutes. On the porch, Amber let out a fresh, piercing wail of despair, realizing her husband had just lost the very investment they needed to save their house, their car, and their curated internet lives. The financial ruin they had desperately tried to outrun had finally caught up to them, dragging them down into the icy mud. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. As the sheriff deputy stepped forward to force Tyler toward his dead battery vehicle, the humiliated imposter turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were dark, hollow, and burning with a toxic, venomous blame. He had lost everything, and he was searching for a way to make me pay the price. The final, desperate test of our family loyalty was about to unfold in the snow, forcing my parents to make an impossible choice between the daughter who had saved them and the golden child who had bled them dry. The property manager lifted her wrist. She tapped the glass face of her watch with a thick fingernail. The gesture was silent, but it echoed like a gunshot in the tense mountain air. The 5-minute grace period had officially expired. The sheriff deputy took a single step toward the porch. He unhooked the radio from his belt. That small movement was all it took. The remaining shreds of defiance evaporated from Tyler and Amber. The reality of impending arrest finally penetrated their thick layer of delusion. They scrambled. The frantic evacuation of the Eco Lodge was a spectacle of profound humiliation. The manager refused to let them linger inside to carefully pack their luxury suitcases. Instead, she retrieved a roll of heavy-duty black trash bags from her vehicle. She tossed the plastic roll onto the frosted deck. "Put your belongings in there and move," the manager ordered. Her voice was devoid of any sympathy. "You do not have time to fold your garments. Get your items and vacate the property immediately." My sister, the glamorous lifestyle influencer who spent hours curating the perfect digital aesthetic, was reduced to shoving expensive cashmere sweaters and designer denim into ordinary garbage bags. Tears streamed down her face, freezing against her cheeks in the bitter wind. She dragged a black plastic sack across the cedar deck, the bottom scraping against the rough wood. Tyler followed her, his posture entirely defeated. He carried 2 bulging bags of his own, his custom-tailored suit wrinkled and stained with melting snow. The image of the arrogant crypto entrepreneur hauling trash bags out of a luxury cabin he claimed to own was a portrait of pure poetic justice. The sky above us began to shift. The pale morning sunlight vanished, swallowed by a thick, bruised blanket of dark gray clouds rolling over the jagged peaks of the Cascades. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees in a matter of minutes. Large, heavy flakes of snow began to fall, swirling in the rising wind. The mountain was preparing to unleash a serious winter storm, and the entire family was now standing exposed in the center of the icy driveway. I stood next to my reliable, all-wheel drive Subaru. The engine was running, the heater blasting warm air to defrost the windshield. Leo sat safely buckled in the back seat, playing a game on his tablet, entirely shielded from the bitter elements and the toxic family fallout. I leaned against the driver's side door, my thick winter coat shielding me from the biting cold. I was ready to drive down the mountain and leave the wreckage behind. But the deeply ingrained habits of a dysfunctional family do not dissolve in a single morning. When an emergency strikes, the members of this family share a singular reflex. They look for the designated shock absorber. They look for me. My mother separated from the group huddled near Tyler's vehicle. Carol wrapped her arms tight around her torso. Her thin wool coat was entirely insufficient for an incoming Oregon blizzard. She took slow, unsteady steps across the slick ice, navigating her way toward my car. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with a faint shade of blue. She looked fragile, old, and terrified. For 34 years, my brain had been meticulously programmed to respond to that specific look of distress. Whenever my mother appeared overwhelmed, my internal protocol dictated that I must instantly suppress my own needs, open my wallet, and fix the problem. The conditioning was a powerful, almost magnetic pull. My chest ached with a familiar, heavy guilt. Carol stopped 2 feet away from me. She shivered, her teeth chattering. "Courtney, please," my mother whispered. Her voice was thin, fragile, carrying a desperate plea that tugged at my deepest insecurities. "You have to help us. We have nowhere to go." I looked past her shoulder. Tyler was furiously pressing the handle of his white electric car, staring at the blank dashboard screen through the window. Amber was sobbing against the trunk. Tyler cards are maxed out, Carol continued, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. Amber just admitted her bank accounts are overdrawn. Your father cannot access his retirement funds until Monday, and the $3,000 he gave your sister is gone. We are trapped up here. The snow is falling so fast. You have the money. Please just book us a hotel room in town. Pay for a place for us to stay tonight so we do not freeze. You can afford it. The request hung in the freezing air, mingling with the falling snow. This was the ultimate test. It was not a test of my financial capacity. I had the funds to book them a block of rooms at the finest resort in Bend. It was a test of my soul. It was a choice between reverting to the invisible, compliant workhorse they expected me to be, or stepping fully into the empowered, independent woman I had fought so hard to become. The internal conflict raged inside me. If I said yes, I would secure their physical safety. I would ease my mother's suffering. I would earn a fleeting moment of their gratitude. But I would also validate their terrible behavior. I would teach them that no matter how horribly they treated me, no matter how much they stole or lied or exploited, I would always arrive with a checkbook to save them from their own consequences. I turned my head and looked through the glass of my car window. Leo was watching a cartoon on his screen, oblivious to the drama. I studied his small, innocent face. I remembered the sight of him just 2 hours ago, struggling through the bitter cold, carrying heavy, wet logs, while his grandmother praised the woman who sent him out there. I remembered Tyler mocking his struggle. I remembered my parents enjoying the warmth of a fire my child had been forced to build. If I bailed them out now, I was telling Leo that our boundaries meant nothing. I would be teaching my son that he must accept mistreatment from blood relatives. Protecting my child meant breaking the cycle today, right here in the snow. I turned back to face my mother. The heavy guilt in my chest vanished, replaced by a clear, unshakable resolve. "No, Mom," I said. My voice was unwavering. It did not shake. It carried over the howling wind, striking with the precision of a sharpened blade. Carol blinked, stepping back as if she had been physically pushed. "But Courtney, we are freezing." I spent my entire vacation budget on a beautiful cabin where I was treated like an unpaid maid, I replied, maintaining direct eye contact. I paid for a luxury experience and I received a chore chart. I am taking Leo to a warm hotel room right now. You can figure out how to get home. The refusal hit her hard. Carol opened her mouth to argue, but before she could formulate a response, heavy footsteps crunched on the ice behind her. My father stomped across the driveway. John's face was contorted into a mask of pure, indignant rage. His pride had taken a massive beating today, and he was searching for a target to unload his frustration. Finding out his golden child was a thief was a bitter pill, but being told no by his subservient daughter was an insult he could not process. "How dare you?" John barked, stepping in front of his wife. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at my face. "You are going to abandon your own flesh and blood in a snowstorm? You are going to drive away and leave us stranded on a mountain? What kind of selfish daughter does that? We raised you. We provided for you." He tried to wield the ancient weapon of parental obligation. He wanted to shame me into compliance. I shook my head, keeping my posture relaxed and confident. "I am not abandoning you, Dad. I am stopping the enablement." I gestured toward Amber, who was still weeping beside the trash bags full of designer clothes. "You made your choice last night at the dinner table," I said smoothly. "You chose to praise and celebrate the daughter who literally robbed you blind. You elevated her while you insulted me. You poured all your love, your trust, and your retirement savings into her hands. So now you can rely on her to fix this." John lowered his hand, his mouth snapping shut. The truth of my words cornered him completely. He had no counter-argument. He could not demand my resources while simultaneously acknowledging he had given all his respect to my sister. I turned around and pulled open the door of my car. The warm air from the heater washed over my face, welcoming and safe. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the seatbelt across my chest. As I reached for the gear shift, a loud, frustrated scream echoed across the driveway. Tyler was slamming his fists against the hood of his pristine white vehicle. The bitter cold had done exactly what he feared. The battery of his leased electric car was completely dead, rendering the expensive machine into nothing more than a heavy metal paperweight. They were not just lacking hotel funds, they were entirely immobilized as the winter storm descended upon the mountain, setting the stage for a brutal lesson in survival that I would not stay to watch. I pulled the heavy door of my vehicle shut, sealing myself inside the insulated cabin of my Subaru. The sudden muffling of the howling mountain wind offered an instant, profound comfort. The dashboard illuminated with a soft, steady glow, indicating the engine was running smoothly, the all-wheel drive system engaged, and the thick snow tires firmly gripping the packed ice beneath us. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Leo remained deeply engrossed in his tablet game, his headphones secured over his ears, entirely shielded from the bitter reality unfolding just a few yards away. Before I could shift the gear selector into drive, a frantic blur of motion caught the corner of my eye. Amber was sprinting across the slippery driveway. She moved with a chaotic, uncoordinated desperation, nearly twisting her ankle on a patch of black ice. She reached the side of my car and slapped her bare, trembling hands against my driver's side window. The sound was sharp, a desperate smacking against the reinforced glass. I turned my head and looked at the woman pressing her face near the glass. My older sister was utterly unrecognizable from the polished, arrogant influencer who had shoved a dirty mop at my chest just a few hours prior. The carefully applied designer foundation was streaked with frozen tears. Her perfectly curled hair was matted and whipped into a tangled mess by the fierce winter winds. Her lips were pale, trembling with a mixture of terror and unadulterated rage. She tapped the glass harder, signaling for me to lower the barrier. I kept my hand on the steering wheel, contemplating ignoring her altogether, but a small, lingering part of me needed to hear her final desperate play. I reached down and pressed the window switch, lowering the glass exactly 1 single inch. A sliver of freezing air instantly sliced into the warm cabin. "Courtney, you cannot do this," Amber shrieked through the narrow opening. Her voice was raw, scratching against her throat. "If you put that car in drive and leave us stranded on this mountain, I am done with you. Do you hear me? I will never speak to you again. I will cut you off forever. You will be dead to me. You will never see your nephews, and you will be entirely removed from my life." The threat hung in the narrow gap between us. It was the ultimate manipulative tactic, tossed into the storm in a desperate bid to reestablish her dominance. She expected me to crumble. She believed that the prospect of losing her approval, of being ostracized from the family dynamic, would terrify me into submission. She thought her presence in my life was a prize I could not bear to lose. I looked at her ruined, desperate face, and I felt nothing but a profound, unshakable clarity. The deep, aching need for her sisterly affection had evaporated, replaced by the sheer relief of unburdening myself. I leaned slightly closer to the narrow crack in the window, ensuring my voice would cut through the whistling wind. "Amber," I replied, my tone flat, calm, and devoid of emotion, "you have not spoken a single genuine word to me in 10 years unless you needed to reach into my wallet. The only time my phone rings is when you require a bailout, a favor, or a scapegoat. You do not love me. You love what you can extract from me." I paused, letting the brutal truth sink into her panicked expression. "So go ahead, cut me off. It is the best gift you could ever possibly give me." I took my finger off the control panel and pulled the switch upward. The thick glass rolled up, sliding firmly into the rubber seal, cutting off her shrill, incoherent scream. I pressed the central locking button on the driver door armrest. A satisfying, heavy click echoed through the vehicle. The physical and emotional barriers were now permanently secured. Through the frost forming on the edges of the windshield, I watched the chaotic scene playing out near the property manager vehicle. Tyler was in the midst of a full-blown psychological meltdown. The early foreshadowing of his complaints had materialized into a catastrophic reality. The severe drop in temperature had drained the battery of his leased electric Tesla. The sleek, expensive machine, which he had proudly flaunted as a symbol of his immense success, was now entirely dead. It sat bricked on the ice, incapable of even unlocking its doors. Tyler was kicking the front driver's side tire with his expensive leather dress shoe. He kicked the rubber again and again, screaming obscenities into the falling snow. His face was contorted with fury, but his actions were entirely futile. Furthermore, a quick glance at his wheels revealed a glaring, fatal oversight. The tires were smooth, low-profile summer treads designed for California highways. He did not possess snow chains. He did not own winter emergency gear. He had driven up a hazardous mountain pass, relying purely on arrogance and the assumption that the world would simply accommodate him. The contrast was stark, poetic, and incredibly satisfying. For my entire life, my family had mocked my practical nature. Tyler had ridiculed my corporate job. Amber had sneered at my reliable, unglamorous vehicle. They preferred performative wealth over actual preparation. Now their performative lifestyle had left them utterly exposed to the unforgiving elements. The toxic family members were stranded in a blizzard, stripped of the invisible safety net I had always provided. Meanwhile, the practical workhorse was sitting in a climate-controlled, winter-ready fortress, possessing the only set of keys that actually mattered. I shifted the gear selector into drive. The all-wheel drive system engaged seamlessly. I pressed my foot gently onto the accelerator. The Subaru gripped the icy terrain, moving forward with a confident, steady traction. I slowly steered the vehicle down the long, winding driveway, maneuvering carefully past the sheriff patrol car and the property manager idling SUV. I glanced in the rearview mirror one final time. The image was a masterpiece of karmic retribution. Amber was slumped against the frozen hood of the dead Tesla, weeping openly. Tyler was throwing a physical tantrum in the snow. My parents stood huddled together, clutching thin jackets, realizing that the daughter they chose to worship was entirely incapable of protecting them. They were shrinking rapidly in the distance, becoming nothing more than small, dark specks against the sprawling white canvas of the harsh mountain landscape. I turned the steering wheel, merging onto the main Alpine road heading toward downtown Bend. The heavy snowfall began to blanket the asphalt, creating hazardous driving conditions for anyone unprepared. I had successfully severed the chains of my past, but the immediate future presented a brand new set of logistical challenges. I needed to secure safe lodging for my son before the impending blizzard shut down the mountain town, and I knew that escaping the physical presence of my family did not mean the digital fallout of their desperation was over. The bitter cold reality of their situation was about to flood my phone, testing my newly forged boundaries in ways I had not yet anticipated. The descent from the treacherous mountain elevation took exactly 38 agonizing minutes. My reliable vehicle handled the worsening whiteout conditions with incredible mechanical grace, the heavy-duty tires crunching securely over the packed frost covering the winding asphalt. Inside the insulated cabin, the heater blasted a steady stream of comforting warmth, rapidly melting the ice that had accumulated on the soles of my boots. I exhaled a long, shaky breath, feeling the rigid, defensive tension slowly draining from the muscles in my neck and shoulders. The rearview mirror no longer reflected the frantic, desperate faces of my toxic relatives. Instead, it displayed only the blinding, swirling precipitation blanketing the steep road behind us, effectively erasing my past with every single mile I covered. As we approached the bustling snow globe aesthetic of downtown Bend, my smartphone vibrated inside the center console cup holder. A notification from the rental application illuminated the glass screen. Because I had personally initiated the commercial violation clause, providing the management company with the necessary evidence to stop an unauthorized corporate event on their premises, the agency had processed an immediate partial refund. A substantial sum of money was instantly deposited back into my personal checking account, honoring the emergency cancellation policy. I did not hesitate to utilize those recovered funds. I steered my car into the cleared parking lot of a prestigious historic lodge situated directly along the icy banks of the Deschutes River. We walked through the towering glass entrance doors into a sprawling lobby that smelled vividly of roasted cinnamon and fresh pine needles. A massive river rock fireplace dominated the central gathering space, casting a rich, welcoming glow over the plush velvet seating areas scattered across the room. A polite, smiling concierge greeted us immediately, handing Leo a complimentary cup of gourmet hot chocolate topped with artisanal marshmallows. There were no laminated chore charts waiting for me in this establishment. There were no whispered insults, no condescending smirks, and absolutely no demands to hide my child in an unheated cellar. I approached the polished mahogany front desk, presented my credit card, and secured their premium riverfront suite for the night. When I swiped the electronic keycard and pushed open the heavy wooden door to our assigned room, a profound sense of peace washed over my exhausted body. The space was magnificent. Vaulted timber ceilings framed a massive king-sized bed draped in thick, luxurious down comforters. A private balcony overlooked the rushing, frost-lined river below, offering a breathtaking view of the winter storm. A deep porcelain soaking tub sat pristine in the spotless marble bathroom. I dropped my canvas duffel bag onto the plush carpet and took a deep, unrestrained breath. For the very first time this entire weekend, the air felt remarkably clean. The suffocating weight of my sister's delusions and my parents' impossible expectations had been completely lifted from my chest. I turned to my son, who was staring in awe at the massive flat-screen television mounted on the stone wall. "We are ordering whatever you want for dinner tonight," I told him, tossing the glossy room service menu onto the mattress. Leo's eyes widened with pure, unadulterated joy. We feasted on towering Wagyu cheeseburgers, crispy truffle fries, and thick chocolate milkshakes, eating right there on the crisp, white bedsheets while watching a comedy movie. There were no complex gourmet meals for me to prep, no massive piles of dirty dishes for me to scrub, and no hypercritical audience monitoring my every move. After we finished our meal, we changed into our swimsuits and rode the glass elevator down to the ground floor. The lodge boasted a spectacular indoor swimming facility. The massive pool was heated to a perfect 85 degrees, surrounded by lush tropical plants and soaring glass windows that offered a front-row seat to the raging blizzard outside. I watched Leo splash and laugh in the crystal-clear water, his earlier trauma of hauling heavy timber in the freezing wind completely washed away by the joy of the moment. Protecting his smile, shielding his dignity from their calculated exploitation, validated every single harsh decision I had made that morning. We returned to our warm suite just after 9 o'clock in the evening. Leo curled up under the heavy down comforters, his breathing slowing into a deep, peaceful slumber within a matter of minutes. I sat on the edge of the mattress, wrapped tightly in a plush terrycloth robe provided by the hotel, enjoying the profound silence of the luxurious room. Then the digital intrusion began. My smartphone, resting on the polished oak nightstand, lit up the darkened corner of the room. The screen flashed relentlessly, vibrating against the wood in a frantic, continuous rhythm that demanded my immediate attention. I reached over and picked up the device. The notifications were flooding in from the family group chat, heavily populated by lengthy, panicked messages from my mother and father. I unlocked the screen, deciding to peer into the catastrophic aftermath of the explosion I had left behind on the mountain. The chronological updates painted a brutal, humiliating picture of their current reality. My father's texts were a chaotic stream of capitalization and desperation. The dead electric vehicle had required a specialized flatbed tow truck to drag it off the icy driveway, costing Tyler an immediate $400 emergency fee just to transport the heavy machinery down the treacherous mountain pass. But the financial hemorrhage did not stop there. Once they managed to hitch a ride down into the city limits, they attempted to secure lodging to ride out the severe winter storm. Amber had confidently approached the front desk of a cheap roadside motel, sliding her premium credit card across the laminate counter. The transaction was declined. She tried a second card, and then a third. Every single account in her name was either maxed out or frozen by the banking institutions. The burden, as it always did, shifted directly to my elderly parents. My father described the agonizing humiliation of standing in the dingy lobby of a rundown establishment, forced to drain an additional block of funds from his fixed retirement savings just to secure 2 cramped, dirty rooms smelling of stale smoke and damp mildew. They were currently trapped in a bleak, depressing space, eating stale vending machine snacks for their evening dinner, while the daughter they had worshipped wept hysterically on a stained mattress. Tyler was furiously pacing their small room, screaming into his mobile phone as his wealthy investors formally withdrew their proposed seed funding, severing all professional ties due to his fraudulent behavior. I read the frantic messages, staring at the glowing pixels, describing their absolute misery. A familiar, deeply ingrained sensation fluttered in the center of my chest. It was the old, conditioned guilt, the lifelong psychological training that dictated I must swoop in, offer my credit card, and elevate their suffering at the expense of my own comfort. The powerful urge to type a sympathetic reply, to offer a digital cash transfer to upgrade their terrible accommodations, tugged aggressively at the edges of my conscience. I pictured my mother shivering in a drafty motel room. I visualized my father staring at his depleted bank statements, realizing his golden years were being actively stolen by his favorite child. But then I looked over at the sleeping form of my son. I listened to his steady, safe breathing in the warmth of our secure environment. I remembered the cold, calculating look on Amber's face when she shoved a dirty mop at my chest. I remembered my father demanding I abandon my own boundaries to protect his fragile, preferred illusion. The brief flicker of guilt extinguished completely, leaving behind a solid, impenetrable wall of self-respect. I did not type a reply. I did not offer a digital olive branch or a word of comfort. I tapped the settings icon in the upper right corner of the chat window. I selected the mute conversation option, disabling all alerts, notifications, and vibrations from that specific thread indefinitely. The screen went dark, returning the room to its tranquil, perfect silence. I placed the device back onto the nightstand. I finally understood that protecting my peace, guarding my child's dignity, and preserving my own financial independence was worth infinitely more than seeking their conditional, toxic approval. The storm raging outside the lodge windows was fierce, but the internal storm that had plagued my entire existence had finally broken. I pulled the heavy comforter over my shoulders, closing my eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring the dawn of an entirely new era. The immediate crisis was resolved, but the long-term consequences of my sister's shattered facade were about to ripple through our lives in ways that would permanently alter the trajectory of our entire family. 3 months have passed since the winter storm swept across the Cascade Mountains, burying the remnants of my toxic family dynamic under a heavy blanket of pristine white snow. The harsh, freezing temperatures have slowly yielded to the gentle, persistent spring rains of the Pacific Northwest. The world outside my window is turning a vibrant, hopeful shade of green, and for the very first time in my 34 years of existence, my internal landscape matches the bright promise of the changing season. The ripples of that fateful morning in Bend spread outward with an astonishing, irreversible speed. When I returned to my corporate office that following Wednesday, my desk phone chimed before I even had the chance to log into my terminal. Jonathan Carmichael requested my presence in his executive suite on the top floor. I walked into his spacious office, taking a seat in a leather chair overlooking the steel bridges spanning the Willamette River. My boss did not ask for apologies regarding the dramatic encounter on the mountain. Instead, he folded his hands on his mahogany desk and offered a rare, genuine smile. He told me that observing a person navigate a high-stakes interpersonal crisis reveals their true character far better than any resume ever could. He noted my refusal to enable fraud, my calm under intense pressure, and my unwavering commitment to the truth. Jonathan stated that a company managing millions of dollars in predictive data required leaders who possessed an unbreakable moral compass. Before I walked out of his office that morning, he formally promoted me to Senior Director of Analytics, accompanied by a substantial salary increase and an equity stake in the firm. The career they had mercilessly mocked became the very instrument of my total independence. Meanwhile, the fabricated empire my sister and her husband built dissolved into thin air. The Portland cryptocurrency community is a tightly knit, highly communicative network. News of Tyler attempting to pass off a rented eco-cabin as his personal asset, culminating in his humiliating eviction by local law enforcement, spread through the industry channels like wildfire. His reputation was instantly and permanently ruined. Every single venture capital firm in the region blacklisted his name. Without the influx of investor cash, his fragile house of cards collapsed entirely. The white electric vehicle was repossessed directly from the driveway of their rented suburban home just 2 weeks later. Amber suffered an equally devastating downfall. Her curated digital presence, which relied entirely on projecting an illusion of effortless luxury, came to a grinding, abrupt halt. She could no longer afford the designer clothing, the artisanal lattes, or the premium backdrops required to sustain her influencer persona. Her social media feed, once a relentless stream of boastful updates, went entirely dark. The silence on her channels speaks volumes. Stripped of the stolen resources she used to prop up her ego, she was forced to face the bleak, unglamorous reality of the life she actually earned. The most profound transformation, however, occurred within my parents. The agonizing experience of shivering in a cheap, run-down motel room, draining their limited retirement funds because their favored daughter had stolen from them, served as a brutal awakening. The thick blinders of parental favoritism were forcibly ripped away. John and Carol returned to their coastal home and immediately hired a civil attorney. They initiated formal legal proceedings to recoup the $3,000 Amber had fraudulently extracted from their savings. Watching my father pursue legal action against his once golden child is a quiet tragedy, but it is a necessary reckoning. They finally see Amber for the parasitic force she truly is. My parents reach out to me frequently now, leaving voicemails filled with apologies, acknowledging the decades of unfair treatment I silently endured. I listen to their messages, but I maintain a strict, low-contact boundary. I return a single phone call every other Sunday. I keep our conversations brief, superficial, and polite. I do not offer financial advice. I do not volunteer to fix their broken appliances. I do not open my wallet to soothe their anxieties. The invisible safety net has been permanently retired. They spent 34 years choosing the daughter who robbed them, and now they must navigate the fallout of that choice without my subsidies. Redirecting my time, energy, and finances away from their endless demands has yielded extraordinary results. The thousands of dollars I previously bled every year to maintain the family peace are now resting securely in a high-yield college savings account for Leo. He will never have to take on crushing student loans or beg for educational support. Furthermore, my recent promotion provided the exact leverage I needed to execute a long-held personal dream. Just last week, I signed the final closing documents on a charming two-bedroom craftsman bungalow situated in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the east side of the city. The house features a wide front porch, a sprawling backyard for Leo to play in, and a beautiful bay window that floods the living room with natural light. The property belongs entirely to me. Every single brick, every wooden floorboard, and every pane of glass was secured through my own honest labor. This evening, the rain patters softly against the roof of our new home. The scent of a home-cooked dinner lingers in the air, rich and comforting. Leo and I are sitting side by side at the polished wooden dining table. A large, colorful map of the dramatic Pacific coastline is spread out across the surface between us. We are planning a genuine, relaxing vacation for the upcoming summer break. There are no secret bookings, no hidden fees, and no manipulative agendas. We are simply mapping out a route to visit the towering sea stacks of Cannon Beach, plotting where to find the best saltwater taffy, and scheduling long afternoons exploring the tide pools. Leo traces a route along the blue ink of the ocean with his index finger. He pauses, his brow furrowing slightly as a thought crosses his mind. He looks up at me, his bright eyes reflecting the warm glow of the pendant lights overhead. "Mom?" Leo asks, his voice soft and genuinely curious. "Is Aunt Amber and Uncle Tyler coming to the beach with us this year?" I set down my pen. I look at my brave, resilient son, remembering the sight of him hauling freezing timber in the snow, and I feel a profound, unshakable surge of protective peace. I reach across the map and gently ruffle his hair. I smile, letting out a quiet, contented sigh as I look around the beautiful, secure sanctuary I have built for us. "No, buddy," I reply, my tone bright and filled with absolute certainty. "From now on, we only share our vacations with people who know exactly how to clean up their own messes." Families are intricate ecosystems, built on the myths we inherit and the stories we repeatedly tell ourselves. The freezing winds of the Cascade Mountains did not just strip the leaves from the evergreens on that fateful winter morning. They violently stripped away a 3-decade-old delusion. Watching a golden child fall and an invisible workhorse walk away forces a profound reckoning about what it truly means to raise a human being. In modern American culture, we so often equate success with visibility. The loudest achievements, the flashiest zip codes, the most carefully curated digital existence. But the total collapse of a fabricated empire on that icy Oregon driveway serves as a devastating mirror for modern parenting. It asks us to look closely at the values we quietly endorse behind closed doors and the invisible, lingering scars we leave on the children we overlook. True family responsibility is not about providing the most comfortable life. It is about providing an honest one. Parents like John and Carol, striving within the traditional American family structure, fell into the seductive, dangerous trap of unequal affection. They equated their eldest daughter's performative wealth with familial success. By turning a blind eye to her flaws, by smoothing over her debts, and by celebrating her hollow illusions, they did not love her, they disabled her. They deprived her of the essential friction required to build actual character. Parenting without the anchor of absolute fairness creates a vacuum where a toxic sense of entitlement breeds. When we raise children to believe they are the exception to the rule, that they do not have to carry their own firewood, literally and metaphorically, we are not giving them a head start in life. We are sending them into a blizzard without a coat. The frantic tears shed in the snow that morning were not born of sudden misfortune. They were the inevitable harvest of a childhood devoid of the word no. Conversely, the child who is assigned the role of the peacekeeper, the one who is handed the mop and told to be grateful for it, learns a deeply damaging lesson about their own worth. Emotional awareness in parenting requires seeing the child who is quietly holding the roof up, not just showering affection on the one demanding a brighter spotlight. For 34 years, a daughter was taught that love was transactional, a scarce commodity she had to continually purchase through silent servitude and absolute compliance. The traditional American ethos often glorifies the stoic, self-reliant individual, but within a family unit, forced hyper-independence is rarely a virtue. It is almost always a trauma response to emotional neglect. A parent's most profound, sacred duty is to witness their children equally, to validate their pain, and to actively protect them from the cannibalistic tendencies of toxic family members. A failure to intervene is a failure to parent, prioritizing the comfort of a peaceful illusion over the messy, uncomfortable truth. The real tragedy of this unbalanced dynamic is its highly infectious nature. Toxic family systems do not just poison the current generation, they actively hunt for the next. This is precisely why long-term guidance for children must be rooted in unyielding boundaries rather than unconditional enablement. When a mother watches her 9-year-old son hauling heavy logs in the freezing cold while his teenage cousins play virtual reality games in a heated room, the generational curse stares her directly in the eye. That moment is the ultimate crucible of parenting. American culture often champions the idea of family first, no matter what. We are aggressively conditioned to believe that keeping the peace and turning the other cheek are the highest moral goods. But true protective parenting sometimes requires initiating the war. The decision to rip those freezing logs from a child's arms is not an act of sibling rivalry. It is an act of maternal salvation. It is a refusal to let the next generation inherit the agonizing legacy of the invisible workhorse. It demonstrates that teaching a child self-respect sometimes means walking away from the very people who share your last name. We must ask ourselves what we are truly valuing in our homes. Are we praising the superficial markers of success, or are we actively cultivating integrity, accountability, and grit? If a family structure is built on a foundation where one child's failure is perpetually subsidized by another child's exhaustion, the entire edifice is fundamentally rotten. It takes immense, terrifying courage to look at the family dynamic you have constructed and admit that it is broken. It takes even more courage to step back and let the golden child fall so they might finally learn how to stand up on their own 2 feet. The greatest, most authentic act of love those parents could have ever shown their favored daughter was to let her walk out into that snowstorm with nothing but the reality she had created for herself. Stories like this resonate deeply because they hold up a mirror to the quiet injustices playing out in living rooms, during holiday dinners, and on family vacations across the country. If you find yourself reflecting on your own family dynamics, questioning your own boundaries, and reevaluating the lessons you are passing down to the next generation, you are not alone in this journey. I encourage you to follow Grape Echo Stories for more narratives that explore the complex, messy, and ultimately triumphant realities of family life. We share these experiences because finding the strength to use your own voice often begins by hearing someone else finally find theirs. As the snow continues to fall and the tracks of the departing vehicles fade entirely into the white landscape, a lingering, uncomfortable truth remains. We are taught from birth that the ultimate goal of a fractured family is reconciliation, that forgiveness is the highest possible virtue, and that a broken circle must always, eventually, be made whole again. But this is a comforting lie we tell ourselves to avoid the guilt of permanent separation. Sometimes the circle is not meant to be closed. Sometimes the healthiest, most beautiful thing a family can do is shatter completely. We are conditioned to believe that cutting ties is a profound failure of love, but in reality, refusing to tolerate exploitation is the most profound expression of self-love a parent can ever model for their child. You do not owe your family your peace, your wallet, or your sanity just because you share a bloodline. The most radical, loving choice you can make for the next generation is to stop trying to heal the people who continuously break you and to start building a new house where they are no longer given a key.